So let us leave behind a country better than the one we were left. With every breath from my bronze-pounded chest, we will raise this wounded world into a wondrous one. We will rise from the gold-limbed hills of the West. We will rise from the wind-swept Northeast, where our forefathers first realized revolution. We will rise from the lake-rimmed cities of the Midwestern states. We will rise from the sun-baked South. We will rebuild, reconcile, and recover in every known nook of our nation, in every corner called our country. Our people, diverse and beautiful, will emerge battered and beautiful. When day comes, we step out of the shade of flame and unafraid. The new dawn blooms as we free it. For there is always light if only we're brave enough to see it, if only we're brave enough to be it.
Her name is Amanda Gorman. She is 22 years old, from Los Angeles. What a just powerful, beautiful piece of poetry she just delivered.
Well, you'd hate to follow her.
Yeah.
She did. We had prose, and now we've had poetry, and we've had song.
Now for our benediction, I'm pleased to introduce Reverend Dr. Sylvester Beeman, the pastor of the Bethel African Methodist Episcopal Church in Wilmington, Delaware, a friend of President Biden for 30 years.
As a nation and people of faith gathered in this historical moment, let us unite in prayer. God, we gather under the beauty of your holiness and the holiness of your beauty. We seek your face, your smile, your warm embrace. We petition you once more in this celebration. We pray for divine favor upon our President, Joseph R. Biden, and our First Lady, Dr. Jill Biden, and their family. We further ask that you would extend the same favor upon our Vice President, Kamala D. Harris, and our Second Gentleman, Doug Emhoff, and their family. More than ever, they and our nation need you. We need you, for in you we discover our common humanity. In our common humanity, we will seek out the wounded and bind their wounds. We will seek healing for those who are sick and diseased. We will mourn our dead. We will befriend the lonely, the least, and the left out. We will share our abundance with those who are hungry. We will do justly to the oppressed, acknowledge sin, and seek forgiveness, thus grasping reconciliation. In discovering our humanity, we will seek the good in and for all our neighbors. We will love the unlovable, remove the stigma of the so-called untouchables. We will care for our most vulnerable, our children, the elderly, emotionally challenged, and the poor. We will seek rehabilitation beyond correction. We will extend opportunity to those locked out of opportunity. We will make friends of our enemies. We will make friends of our enemies. People, your people, shall no longer raise up weapons against one another. We will rather use our resources for the national good and become a beacon of life and goodwill to the world. And neither shall we learn hatred anymore. We will lie down in peace and not make our neighbors afraid. In you, O God, we discover our humanity. In our humanity, we discover our commonness. Beyond the difference of color, creed, origin, political party, ideology, geography, and personal preferences. We'll become greater stewards of your environment, preserving the land, reaping from it a sustainable harvest, and securing its wonder and miracle-giving power for generations to come. This is our benediction, that from these hallowed grounds, where slaves labored to build this shrine and citadel to liberty and democracy, let us all acknowledge, from the indigenous Native American to those who recently received their citizenship, from the African American to those whose foreparents came from Europe and every corner of the globe, from the wealthy to those struggling to make it, from every human being, regardless of their choices, that this is our country. As such, teach us, O God. As such, teach us, O God, to live in it, love in it, be healed in it, and reconcile to one another in it, lest we miss kingdom's goal. To your glory, majesty, dominion, and power forever. Hallelujah. Glory, hallelujah. In the strong name of our collective faith, amen.
Please remain standing as the Armed Forces Color Guard retires our national colors.
And that concludes the inauguration ceremony at the Capitol. It looked different than any other, and as we expected, the empty spaces, the social distancing. What we didn't see, except in a few cutaways, I suppose, the soldiers, that ring of steel around this general area, owing to what happened 2 weeks ago. I want to bring in NBC News presidential historian Michael Beschloss. Michael, give me your first early reaction to the inauguration speech.
Please be seated.
Terrific speech, and I think, Lester, it'll be known for 3 words. Democracy has prevailed. The new president is talking about the last 4 years as a period where there were attacks on democracy, attacks on truth, attacks on humanity, looking at it sort of a 4-year aberration from the general course of American history. I thought the speech was modest, austere, grave, cleansing, calming, and inspirational. And that's what you'd want today. In contrast to Donald Trump 4 years ago, who was talking about American carnage with groups pitted against group, Joe Biden was talking today about a country that needs to be united and also needs to mourn more than 400,000 Americans who have died of a terrible virus, more than died in the military in World War II.
And Michael, there's no question that the president is looking to turn the page, saying we must end this uncivil war. And on the steps of the Capitol and with allusions to Abraham Lincoln, that is not a throwaway line, especially when you think about what happened 2 weeks ago when there was an insurrection attempted at the United States Capitol to subvert democracy itself. As you mentioned, he said, this is America's day, this is democracy's day, and democracy has prevailed. He clearly feels that, above all, unity is the business and the mission of this presidency.
You were so right, Savannah. And he's saying something, you know, at all these inaugurations, every new president lauds democracy and the peaceful transfer of power so much that we take it for granted. President Biden, 2 weeks after the attack on the Capitol and the Congress of January 6th, is speaking to us at a moment in which we have just had a very close call. Under a few scenarios, we might have lost our democracy. What might we be talking today? And at the same time, he recognizes that he has to deal with more crises at once than almost any president in American history. The pandemic, the economic crisis, people are starving and out of jobs, a crisis of racial justice that's gone on for 400 years with systemic racism, a crisis of climate change, and others. These are not things that he could just afford to say, maybe I'll do that after the midterm election, or maybe I'll do it if I'm reelected to a second term. He knows he has to do all these things right now. Very tough for a new president.
The new president and new first lady making their way now up from the platform. We'll see them again a bit later at the laying of the wreath at the tomb of the unknown soldier at Arlington National Cemetery. Let me bring in Mike Barnicle into our conversation, a veteran journalist, an NBC News contributor, also a longtime family friend of the Bidens. Michael, he spoke of unity as we thought. He acknowledged that some may see it as words. What are the deeds that will have to follow to fully deliver this message?
Well, I think the deeds are obvious to all, Lester. He has got to attack the virus with a vaccine, apply it to hundreds of millions of Americans in order to get the rest of the ball rolling and get the job done. The speech itself, I thought, though, had elements, deeply personal elements. At one point, the president said, there's no accounting for what fate will do to you. And God knows that's true for Joe Biden. He has carried his own cross for 50 years of loss and suffering, but also of resilience. And his very presence on the stage today was a form of resilience in full flower. We saw him as President of the United States, and he spoke to elements of his own character, his own personality, that he thinks should apply to the United States of America. Elements of humility, tolerance, generosity, and optimism. And as Savannah just mentioned, he said, you know, we've got to end this uncivil war. That's in his nature to do that. The speech, while personal, it was also political, and it was about joining together as a country and reestablishing the component part of truth in government, truth in the Oval Office, something that's been sorely missing for 4 years.
I thought it was interesting, Mike, as well. It was very much a Joe Biden speech, and he spoke and addressed those who aren't his supporters and said, as many presidents have said, I'll work as hard for you as I do for those who did support me. But then he said something else. He said, if you didn't support me, all I ask is hear me out. Hear me out. Take a measure of me and my heart. And if you still disagree, well, that's democracy.
Yeah, you know, Savannah, that's really interesting because he did say that, and you can hear him say that across the table to a Mitch McConnell. And Mitch McConnell has listened to Joe Biden in the past and would certainly, we all hope as Americans, would listen to him now, because he knows that Joe Biden means what he says, that I know you might not agree with me on the total package, the cost of it or whatever, but hear me out. And Mitch McConnell knows something else, that in looking across the table at Joseph R. Biden, the 46th President of the United States, he is looking at an honest man, a good man, someone not out to get the better of him just for the sport of getting the better of someone else, an opponent, someone intent on doing what he can to do for the greater good of all of us as Americans.
Mike, you know the man. He's 78 years old, but I like to think that we all continue to grow. How has he grown from when he threw his hat in the ring as a candidate, when we had never heard of a thing called COVID, where people weren't trying to, tear down the Capitol? How has he changed? How has he grown into this job that he just took on?
You know, I think over the years, especially over the last few years, he has become calmer, more accepting of fate. He is not bitter about any of the elements of fate that have cost him and his family so much. And I think that has helped him as a public person. I can remember the morning of the New Hampshire primary. backstage off the set of Morning Joe and talking to him, and he knew what the result was going to be. And he knew that he was going to get crushed in New Hampshire, having already been crushed in Iowa. But again, I get back to resilience, that word. That's in his character. He's a resilient person. And he wasn't meeting the results of both states, either Iowa or New Hampshire, with any bitterness. His innate sense of optimism still flourished, still grew, and he couldn't wait to get to South Carolina. And he got to South Carolina with a calmness and a commitment and a sense of purpose, all things that have driven him for all of his life. And look where we are today.
It's interesting, Mike, because you talking about New Hampshire reminds me of, I interviewed him in Iowa where he was coming in third or fourth, and I talked to him backstage at a rally that barely anybody was there, and no one thought he would be the nominee, let alone the president. And actually off camera, he said to me, just watch, I'm going to win this thing. I'm going to win this thing, meaning the presidency. Yeah. So there was something, a resoluteness that, frankly, back then, you know, it sounded like happy talk, but he certainly seemed to believe it, truly believe it in his soul, that this is exactly where he would end up.
Yeah, that's who he is. In large part, that's who he is. In New Hampshire, again, backstage, you know, I put my hands on his shoulders and I said, you know, you're going to be okay. And in his right hand, from his pants pocket, he removed some rosary beads and showed them to me. He carries rosary beads with him every single day of his life. He looked at the rosary beads, he looked at me and said, I'm going to be all right. That's who he is.
Mike Barnicle, I want to bring in Andrea Mitchell right now, who's been standing by. Andrea, give me your early impressions of the inauguration ceremony, the speech, and where we go now.
Well, the ceremony, the speech, I thought were really important and optimistic, hopeful, but confronting. Right at the beginning, the new president spoke of the insurrection, spoke of the riot. He talked about democracy was tested. Democracy, America has been tested, and we have prevailed. Democracy and justice have prevailed. So he confronted that reality. He was not hiding from it, but goes on to speak very plainly, but also eloquently. There was great poetry, really, in his prose, in that he was speaking directly to Americans in the way that was authentic for Joe Biden, but also had the cadence and the lilt and the lift of an important moment, because he was calling us to be together and to be resilient. All of that was very powerful to me. He confronted the difference between lies and truth, not just saying, I'm never going to lie to you, but really saying that lies and the purpose of achieving power or what has been so terrible. That was the implication, and we all know what he was talking about. Also, the pageantry and the songs, and I've got to say, Amanda Gorman, the young poet laureate, she became the poet laureate of Los Angeles at the age of 16. She's now 22. She had said that she was finishing her poem after the riot, after the insurrection, and was not going to gloss over it, and she did not. But she said, we will raise this wounded world into a wondrous one. There will always be light. I just thought her whole manner, and I just also to take us back to the sober reality, because the new president spoke, looking around him, very comfortable in that moment, which really gave a sense of a new confidence. He really has grown, as you were just discussing with Mike Barnicle, over these many months when you first were talking to him back in Iowa with all of those losses in Iowa, New Hampshire, and finally Super Tuesday, but really growing into this moment, looking around him very confidently at the members of Congress, the senators with whom he had served for 30 years, and saying, we know that there are people around the world. Look at us, and we have survived this, and we will not only go forward, but we're going to go forward and do more, was all that he said. And at this moment, China has done an extraordinary thing, Lester and Savannah. China has sanctioned outgoing Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, who left the State Department very somberly this morning, has sanctioned him, his relatives, and any company that he works for, and 28 officials, Peter Navarro, the very aggressive hardliner, the trade negotiator, and other officials, John Bolton, who can never step foot in China, in Hong Kong, or Macau, all part of the Beijing government. And that is an extraordinary sanction.
It's a
against
long
the
list.
former top U.S. diplomat.
To Alex Azar, of course, the former Health and Human Services Secretary is on the list, as is Matt Pottinger, a deputy, and the National Security Council, Robert O'Brien, who was National Security Advisor. So, yes, some news coming out of China at the very moment those officials became former officials. Andrea, stay with us as we continue to watch some of the scenes that were earlier visible at the Capitol. The Obamas exiting the stage, and the former presidents, Bush, Obama, and Clinton, will join the new president at Arlington National Ceremony a little bit later this afternoon for a wreath laying, which we will wish we could heard what that was over my talking, but in any event, we'll rewind the tape for you. But they'll do that later this afternoon. And we turn now to a couple of guests who certainly know the challenges that any new administration will face. Andy Card, who was Chief of Staff to President George W. Bush, John Podesta, Chief of Staff to President Clinton, and Counselor to President Obama. Gentlemen, thank you for being with us. Raise your hand if you'd like to be Chief of Staff under these circumstances. This is not an easy task before them. I'll let you go, John. What did you think of the speech, and what do you think of what this president has before him?
Well, look, I think as for the speech, I thought it was a powerful call to the idea of America as one nation under God, and a fierce rejection of the politics of division and hate that we've seen for the past 4 years. It was passionate. The line that stuck with me was, "My whole soul is in it," quoting Abraham Lincoln, and Biden saying, "My whole soul is in it, uniting the people." I think everyone watching it knew in his bones that that's what he meant. That's what he expected to convey. He talked about the 4 crises facing the country, and for Ron Klain, the incoming Chief of Staff, for his whole team, they know they have to get on top of COVID. They have to deal with the economic crisis, the racial justice crisis, the climate crisis. It's a huge task, but they've been planning for it. They've stayed disciplined. They haven't been thrown off course, I think, particularly in the last couple of weeks. And so I think they're ready to get into those offices and begin to do the work of the country.
Andy, you were literally in the ear of President Bush at the time of 9/11. You knew a little something about an administration suddenly on emergency war footing. This is a little different in that President Biden knew what the country was facing. He's had time to now look at the vaccination plan. Nonetheless, how does it change an administration to have almost a singular focus, that everything ultimately revolves around COVID?
Well, first of all, I do think that this is a time of history and hope, and this inauguration was a tribute to our democracy. I agree with what the president said, and I loved how he said it. And yes, he acknowledged that there is much to repair, much to restore, and much to rebuild, and that's the challenge.
And Andy, as I just want to pause because I want people to see what's happening here. It's important. The Vice President Harris and her husband Doug Emhoff had just escorted former Vice President Pence and Karen Pence down the East Front steps of the Capitol. And Andy, I mean, to continue your thought, this is a moment that the country needed to see its leaders of both political parties come together. The president, former President Trump, did not choose to attend, but Vice President Pence's choice to come was a real statement. How important do you think that was?
I think it's critically important, and I compliment Vice President Pence for being there, and I actually celebrate the role that he played in the last 10 days to help us celebrate our democracy and restore it and put it on the right path. So I'm glad that he was there, and I'm grateful that Kamala Harris, the new vice president, seems to be very gracious to Vice President Pence, and I think that was a good signal to see. I was also thrilled that the former presidents that were there celebrating our democracy. It's so important for us to polish our democracy. It's been very tarnished, and the world is watching us. So this inauguration was a very good inauguration. I pray that people paid attention to it objectively, put their partisan differences aside, and just listen to it, because this was an inauguration of hope and I'm going to say resolve and determination to make sure that everyone's voices in this country are heard, but that our democracy and the institutions of our democracy will work. And we've got to help to make sure they work for the benefit of everyone. And so I compliment the president for setting a tone that was very important for us to have. We needed it, and it was long overdue.
Former Vice President Mike Pence and his wife, their motorcade now, having left the Capitol. Let's go to Craig Melvin, who's there on that east front of the Capitol. Craig?
Hey, Lester. So what we're watching right now, the vice president and her husband, they're heading back into the rotunda now as we watch former Vice President Mike Pence's motorcade head out. At this point, we don't know where he and Karen Pence are going, but they're leaving the Capitol. So right now, they'll go back inside to the rotunda. The Vice President, President Biden, inside now with the First Lady. They'll have a brief luncheon with House and Senate leadership. And then there'll be a sort of an exchanging of gifts, if you will. Members of the inaugural committee will present some gifts to the president and the vice president as we watch Speaker Pelosi talking to the new vice president there as well. And so they'll disappear for roughly 30 minutes. And then after that, they'll descend the steps once again. President Biden and the new First Lady will also join them. And that's when they'll make that procession to Arlington National Cemetery for a wreath-laying ceremony. We're told that the former presidents will go ahead of President Biden, but that they'll all join in the wreath-laying there. That should take about 10 or 20 minutes. They're about 15 minutes behind schedule at this point, Lester and Savannah, but you can see the House and Senate leadership. This is some video from earlier, obviously, but we just saw the House and Senate leadership getting ready to head in for that private luncheon. One thing I can also tell you, just a little bit of color from the east side of the Capitol. Of course, the actual swearing in was on the west side. While that was happening, we got to sort of watch Secret Service transform the beast, as it's known. That, of course, the limousine that President Biden will be traveling in over the next 4 years. They outfitted it with new decals. They attached new U.S. flags to it as well. So the peaceful transfer of power continues. Small and large.
Yeah.
Check the oil and the windshield wiper fluid. And
we saw him wiping it down as well.
Well, it is the COVID era after all. Craig, thank you so much.
I would like to think that the images we've seen here the last couple hours will begin to erase some of what we saw 2 weeks ago, because, you know, that has been so associated now with the Capitol.
Yeah, it's a good way to put it, that hopefully these powerful images of party leaders coming together, of a peaceful transfer, will in some ways supersede those disturbing images that we've seen. We see there Hillary and Bill Clinton walking down the hall, people grabbing their pictures. As mentioned, they're headed to Arlington National Ceremony with the other former presidents in attendance today for a wreath laying. We want to bring in Chuck Todd, and Chuck, you know, these moments, I'm sure, I know you, and I know that you are somebody who grew up watching inaugurations, and you've been a political junkie for your whole life. And, you know, I was thinking about that myself in these last few weeks, and how meaningful it is, and what it gives to the American people to see political rivals and people from different parties come together in a moment of unity and grace, and that itself has a lot of healing potential.
You know, Savannah, to watch Joe Biden today, it was such a stark reminder of how, as a country, we do seek out whatever we think we were missing, you know, whatever it is we thought we were missing in the previous president. He is the better angel president. Joe Biden believes he's eternally optimistic. He's not cynical. The guy's been in Washington so long, you would think, you know, some of us are here too long and you become cynical. He's never cynical. He still thinks the better angels exist, and it was just such an important moment. But you're right. I mean, January 6th has made this, I think, much more meaningful to so many people. Forget just those of us, so, you know, sort of, you know, raised to be history junkies the way I was raised. I mean, it certainly is an elixir. By the way, a point of research, I had my team look. This is the first inaugural address ever to mention the virus of white supremacy. We looked at every inaugural address, and you know, these are important. You know, this inaugural address is part of the American story. And that's what I sort of loved about it, is that Joe Biden wrapped himself in the story of America that sort of has a true north. And it was sort of an attempt to, look, you can't erase the chapter of the last 4 years, but you can put a marker down and show that we've moved forward. And I just think it is important to say that the fact that he said white supremacy, and he talked about it as a scourge in this country, and to be the first president to do it, I also think that's just an important marker that years from now will be looked back on as an important inflection point that an American president said.
Yeah, Chuck, you know, you talk about it being an elixir to see people from different parties, you know, coming together. I mean, this is an inauguration. This is, you know, a public event. It doesn't erase the fact that some of the people on that very podium did not want to approve the electoral vote count. That it's going to be more than smiles and handshakes and you know, public moments like that to erase what's wrong, what's broken.
You know, I think this is going to be extraordinarily difficult. And, you know, it will be interesting. Joe Biden is a forgiver. And it's going to frustrate some Democrats at times, because I think he is going to want to figure out a way to put his arm around some of these folks in a way, even frankly, when they don't deserve it. Even when they haven't done enough to at a minimum apologize for what they did. The fact that we haven't seen that from these 140-odd Republicans that essentially went on the record to challenge the democracy. I do think it's going to be an enormous challenge. There's levels of distrust inside that Congress that we've never experienced in our lifetimes. When I say distrust, like, you know, to the point of, you know, they fear for their own security around each other. That is such a horrendous and toxic place to be. And it's like that fever has to break. But I have to tell you, I think it begins, you know, this idea that Joe Biden is always going to be expected to go 90% of the way, which maybe he will, but he shouldn't, when we haven't seen some of these folks go 40% of the way.
And by the way, there's an impeachment trial, perhaps days away, on top of all that.
And look, and it may create more of a divide, but it's going to be a divide inside one party. And I do think it's interesting today. I think we're seeing a picture of sort of, there's two Republican parties right now, and the question's going to be, are they going to survive as one and figure out how to become one again? Or are you going to see Trump splinter off into one direction and sort of the pro-democracy Republicans splinter off in another direction? The impeachment trial is going to tell us a lot about that.
Well, there is so much before this new president. We've talked about the challenges. He said, you know, the pandemic, the economy, the issues of racial justice, but add the spirit of this country and the division, put that at the top of the list, because to get anything done on the other, you need to do some repair there. There's much to repair, for sure. We're going to take a quick break. Back with much more of our Inauguration Day coverage right after this.
For breaking news in our changing world, download the NBC News app.
We are a country of laws, a democracy built on free and fair elections, where the majority, not the mob, rules, and no rioter, no act of insurrection or domestic terror, no desperate despot can take away all we have built, all that we stand for, and all we hold dear.
Make no mistake, what happened that day was an insurrection against the United States government. Is this the beginning of something or the end of something? Should Donald Trump be ostracized from the Republican Party as you know it?
If it's Sunday, it's Meet the Press. For breaking news in our changing world, download the NBC News app.
A live look at the National Mall filled with American flags, the Washington Monument behind. Welcome back to our coverage of the inauguration of President Biden. Chief White House correspondent Kristen Welker joining me now. Kristen, we're an hour into this new presidency.
We are, Lester, and what struck me about President Biden's speech is that it was a real call to action. He talked about unity, not in the poetic, symbolic sense, but in sending a message to the American people that, yes, he is confronting multiple crises at once, but he essentially said if we are going to be able to address these crises, we have to do it together. And I thought that was really notable. The other thing about this event that really hit me, the fact that Biden has talked about his promise that his administration is going to be a reflection of America, that America will be able to see itself in his administration. Here we saw that start to form, both in terms of who participated in this inauguration ceremony. You had the diversity Jennifer Lopez, you had Lady Gaga, and then, of course, you had Amanda Gorman, that poet laureate. And then, of course, you had the first black female vice president sworn into office. And she is just one of the many firsts within the Biden administration. He has nominated someone who would be the first black defense secretary, the first female Treasury secretary, and the list goes on. And he sees that as essential to his call to action when it comes to unifying this country and when it comes to leading this country in this critical moment and confronting, of course, the issue of race, what you all were just talking about before we went to break. Now, Biden, once he does go back to the White House later on this evening, will be signing a series of executive actions. So the work begins today in confronting these crises, actions that will deal with COVID, actions that will be aimed at reversing some of President Trump's most controversial policies, rolling back that ban on travel from Muslim-majority countries, rejoining the Paris Climate Agreement, and also signing executive actions that deal with racial disparities. So the new president, the 46th president, getting to work today. Lester and Savannah.
All right, Kristen, thanks.
Let's go to Hallie Jackson, our senior Washington correspondent. Hallie, the president has his work cut out for him. So does the Congress, and they've got a bunch of things on their plates. Obviously, there's the impeachment, but there's also a COVID relief package, and there are the confirmation of the Biden cabinet to deal with.
Not to mention a massive immigration bill that Joe Biden, President Biden, now plans to send over in the next 24 hours, in his first 24 hours as president. So, yeah, there's a lot on the plate. And we're already starting to get in some reaction now from some Senate Republicans to the president's inaugural speech. Senator Lisa Murkowski says it was well done and what the country needed. Senator Mitt Romney, who has never been shy to criticize President Biden's predecessor, said it was powerful and given with conviction. So those are stamps of approval from people who will be critical in creating some kind of momentum for President Biden in the Senate. And that is because the key focus now is not on necessarily the extreme sort of ends of either party, right? Those senators who are considered potentially more progressive on the far left or more conservative on the far right. It is that group in the middle that includes, for example, Senator Romney, Senator Murkowski, Senator Susan Collins, Senator Joe Manchin, who we saw on stage here at the west front of the Capitol a couple of minutes ago, along with others chatting with Lady Gaga, who held court for a while out here. They become really the critical voices here in helping to create momentum and create some consensus around these things that President Biden wants to do. And yes, it is a lengthy list. First and foremost is that economic relief package, $1.9 trillion that calls for a slew of things to help Americans struggling in this pandemic. That is massive. That is a huge relief bill. And that is not necessarily going to be an easy sell, even with the pandemic, as dire as it is right now in this country. You've got that immigration bill. That is something where President Biden and his team want to put a flag in the ground now and stake that out that would essentially provide a pathway to citizenship for the more than 11 million people in this country that are undocumented. He's also, of course, twinning that with an executive order protecting so-called dreamers who were brought to this country when they were very young. And then you have the business of cabinet nominations. The president is actually in the Capitol in these moments where we're not seeing him. That's one of the things he's doing. He's actually signing those cabinet nominations. They have to get through. And by the way, an impeachment trial for the person who just preceded President Biden. And that is going to take up bandwidth and energy. Now, that said, I've spoken with some of those on the Democratic side who are involved in the process who say, yes, this is likely going to be fairly quick. That appears to be part of the strategy from the Democratic impeachment managers, not to drag this out, not to draw it out. But regardless, it is going to take a lot of mental energy at the very least from these senators. When you talk about the relationship, too, between President Biden and the person who was not here at the West Front today, and that is now former President Donald Trump. As of noon, in the middle of President Biden's speech, of course, that transfer of power formally and officially happened. And I was struck as somebody who was standing, I think, at this exact same spot on this riser 4 years ago, listening to then President Trump's speech. And I was going back and reading it ahead of our coverage today and refreshing my memory about the American carnage piece of it and the tone of that. You have here and the contrast between what we saw 4 years ago and today. President Biden today talking about wanting to fight for the people who did not vote for him, who did not support him, asking them to hear him out. President Trump 4 years ago vowing to fight for what he called the forgotten people. He described, President Trump did 4 years ago, what he described as rotting factories dotting the country like tombstones. The American carnage will stop. It was such a difference from the way that President Biden talked about his hopes for the country, perhaps criticized by some as overly optimistic given where we are at the moment. But this is what got Joe Biden into office partly. This is what elevated him into this role now. And the contrast could not have been more stark between these two speeches and between these two moments. You also heard President Biden very directly confront not just issues of racial equity, not just issues in this country related to white supremacy, but regarding the basic tenets of truth and facts and what reality actually is. He directly addressed news sources, for example, calling on people to listen to sources that are reliable and to make themselves informed citizens of the democratic process. And he very directly talked about the need to combat misinformation. That, of course, was one of the themes, one of the hallmarks of the last 4 years of the now former Trump administration. Savannah?
Yeah, he called out lies told for power and for profit, and without naming anybody, talked about leaders who engaged in them. Let's go to Leon Panetta, former California congressman, of course, who was also CIA director and defense secretary under President Obama. And I thought, Secretary Panetta, that there was a moment when President Biden addressed the world, and he said very starkly, America has been tested and we have come out stronger for it. As somebody whose job once was to protect this country vis-a-vis the world, as defense secretary and CIA director, why do you think that was an important message to send?
It's an important message that America is back as a world leader. And I think that is particularly important. These last 4 years have been chaotic. We've gradually withdrawn from the world to an America First approach. We undermined alliances. We empowered adversaries. And I think there's a tremendous amount of distrust about America. And after the siege of the Capitol, it also sent a message of whether or not our democracy was sound. I think what President Biden was trying to do was to send a new message to the world, that America is back, that we will be a world leader, that we will work with our alliances, that we will recognize who our adversaries are, and that we will do everything we can to try to confront the dangerous threats that exist in the world today.
Secretary Panetta, Lester Holt here. Talk about the foreign challenges, Iran and China and North Korea. When and how would you expect them to test a new president?
Well, that's the challenge that obviously will concern the president and his cabinet as to When is he going to suddenly confront that crisis abroad? And we don't know the answer to that. But we do know that in these last few years, I think things have rapidly deteriorated around the world. Iran is in a much more difficult situation. They're enriching nuclear fuel, coming closer to the possibility of developing a nuclear weapon. North Korea is continuing to develop nuclear weapons. We're in a whole new Cold War with Russia, with China. And so there are a number of areas that represent real threats. All of these things could explode. All of these things could turn into crisis very quickly. Now, I'm hoping that adversaries will try to measure Joe Biden and the new administration, what their intent are, whether or not they can reach out, whether or not there can be any communication. So there'll be a period of testing, I think, that will go on before we see whether or not they turn to crisis or whether they turn to dialogue.
And now we have a threat at home that, again, the president called out by name, domestic extremism, and saying we must confront it and we will defeat it, adding yet another concern, a national security concern right here at home.
No, there's no question. We're not, it's the Constitution says defend against both foreign and domestic threats, and that is exactly what we're confronting right now. We have foreign terrorism in the form of ISIS and Al-Qaeda and Boko Haram and all of the other groups that continue to target the United States and target other countries. And now we have domestic terrorism in this country with people that were willing to use clubs and flagpoles and be able to attack the capital of the United States. Willing to kill, willing to destroy property, willing to destroy our democracy. That is a threat we have to recognize. It's a threat we have to deal with. Just as after 9/11, we recognized we had to go to war against foreign terrorism after January 6th. I think we recognize that we're going to have to go to war against domestic terrorism as well.
All right, Secretary Panetta, nice to have you on. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, sir.
Good to be with you.
I want to go to our Capitol Hill correspondent, Casey Hunt, to talk about the challenges ahead for the new president and Congress. Casey.
Lester, they are many, but I will say that this speech that Joe Biden gave today, President Biden now, of course, has so far been getting pretty positive reviews from the members of Congress that he's going to have to work with as president to try and tackle some of the biggest crises that we have faced as a nation in generations. Mitt Romney telling reporters inside the Capitol that he had positive words praising Joe Biden's speech here, President Biden's speech, really opening the door in many ways to doing the things that he has talked about on the campaign trail, to figuring out a way to solve big problems because of the relationships that he's built up over many years. Don't forget, Joe Biden knows this Capitol building as well as anyone has. He was, at the time, one of the youngest senators to come in here many years ago, really a person of the Senate. And I think that's going to make a real difference as he tries to figure out how to, first of all, try and get some economic help out to Americans who are really struggling. He's already said he wants to do that. That's going to be the first priority out of the gate. But it is going to take compromise no matter what. And that has been something that's been in really short supply, certainly through the Trump era, but even during the Obama presidency was something that the country, the Congress in particular, really struggled with. So he does have a working relationship with Mitch McConnell, who is, of course, going to be the minority leader. He's going to have control of the Senate and the House, but his majorities are going to be incredibly narrow. And so it's going to be a real challenge here. But I think that there's a willingness, and certainly I've already been talking with some members, texting with some members of Congress who say that if this tone can hold, the tone that he set today, this speech not a campaign-style speech, not a speech about Joe Biden personally, but rather a speech about the country. It was an American speech more than a campaign speech. And that tone is very important to people here who, have a lot of their own political considerations, certainly, but who also do, in many cases, want to get big things done while they're here. And Joe Biden has given them an opening to try and do it, even if they disagree with the way he may go, or excuse me, if they disagree with the things that he is trying to do. I think that there is a sense that people are ready here to turn the page on an era that's been pretty difficult. And, I think in no small part that's because of what happened on January 6th. It was really an extraordinary moment that I think underscored to members of Congress just how serious this chapter in our history has been, to the point that their lives were personally endangered. The life of the vice president was personally endangered. And there's a sense that it's very important to demonstrate to Americans that that's not how business is going to be done anymore. And President Biden gave them the opportunity to join in a bigger project, something that's not partisan, to join in the democratic process. That line, democracy has prevailed, I think is one that has really resonated here, and that if there is hope for bipartisan compromise, a little bit of a détente, perhaps, that will allow some big things to get done here, it's going to be in that tone, that attitude, that change from the top, Lester.
All right, Casey, thank you. And we should know, in a few minutes, we should see President Biden at a signing ceremony there in the Capitol.
Yeah, there's still a few things to do in terms of the inaugural ceremony today. We'll have our eyes on that building, the signing ceremony. There will be a trip to Arlington National Cemetery for wreath laying with the other former presidents joining in, and also a brief procession parade, a virtual parade. So we will see some of the ceremony that we traditionally see on Inauguration Day, albeit in a different form given the pandemic and the security concerns. Let's turn now to Claire McCaskill, former Democratic senator from Missouri, and Rich Lowry, editor of the National Review, both NBC News political contributors. And Senator McCaskill, let me start with you, because you used to work in that building. You know the politics, you know the dynamics, and you just heard Casey talking about it. And look, inauguration days are supposed to be days of hope. They're supposed to be days where we look upward and outward and think, oh, maybe, just possibly, there could be hope to work together and unify. Do you feel that there is that potential in light of what's happened, and in particularly on January 6th?
Well, one thing's clear. Joe Biden's going to give it everything he's got. I think it is too early to tell whether or not, especially the Trump loyalists, whether they will be willing to set aside some of the rhetoric and try to find some things they can agree on. But there is the ability that Biden has to move an agenda now, because they control what's on the floor in both the House and the Senate, and that's a big, powerful thing. I was struck mostly by the contrast between this speech and the speech of 4 years ago. Both Republican and Democratic senators on that podium 4 years ago were shaking their head when it was over. The dystopian carnage versus today, where the president spoke a lot about people who didn't support him, unification, and led the country in a silent prayer for those who had died because of COVID. It was a stark contrast, and I think it was a very strong and uplifting, and certainly a more radically normal inaugural address by the president.
Let me get Rich thoughts on how President Biden might be able to try and double down on what is so far getting rave reviews, this idea of unity. He's going to open up with an immigration proposal, helping people achieve citizenship on a quicker timetable. Is that a good opening place?
I don't think so, and I think that's very unlikely to achieve unity, and I think a lot of his proposals won't achieve unity. Now, I think his calls for unity today were utterly sincere. They're deeply felt. They're things he has said throughout his entire campaign. So I think where he'll have more success is the new tone, which is easier. I think there's still going to be disagreements about these policies, and there should be, but they'll be pursued a little more respectfully than they have been over the last 4 years. And this is the thing. We had a president of the United States for 4 years who's constantly stirred the pot, in part because he was bored and just wanted to see things blow up on TV. That obviously is not going to happen under Joe Biden. And Trump was interested in politics politics that was a constant spectacle, that you couldn't take your eyes off of, that made you gawk or your jaw drop, whether you agreed or disagreed. And the inaugural speech was in 2016 was part of that. What we saw today, Claire calls it radically normal, and it's kind of the implicit promise that Biden has made. Actually, you will be able to turn the screen off during my presidency. It'll be more conventional. It'll be more boring. It'll be actually dull in a welcome way. And I think that's something that people on both sides of the aisle after the last 4 years probably welcome.
Well, I was going to say, Rich, I mean, could that be the unifying work? I mean, honestly, just being able to remember for a moment that Washington is going about its business, but we don't have to pay attention to it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a big reason that Joe Biden won. I mean, his fundamental mandate, one, to take COVID more seriously, but two, was just not to be Donald Trump and not to behave the way Donald Trump behaved and trample our norms and our traditions. And that's something that's easily achievable, and a first step was today, which was completely boring, but was made compelling just because of what we saw over the last two or three weeks. But it's not going to be as good copy for journalists. It's not going to be, sorry, Savannah, it's not going to be as good for TV news necessarily. But that's something that Biden can absolutely follow through on.
All right, Rich and Claire, thanks very much. We're going to take a very short break and be back with more of our coverage of this Inauguration Day.
Here we stand, just days after a riotous mob thought they could use violence to silence the will of the people, to stop the work of our democracy, to drive us from this sacred ground. It did not happen. It will never happen. Not today, not tomorrow, not ever. Not ever.
Are you ready?
Monday boost?
Are you ready for a boost?
How do you feel about that book?
We love those nurses. That was beautiful.
We are a country of laws, a democracy built on free and fair elections, where the majority, not the mob, rules, and no rioter, no act of insurrection or domestic terror, no desperate despot can take away all we have built, all that we stand for, and all we hold dear.
Make no mistake, what happened that day was an insurrection against the United States government. Is this the beginning of something or the end of something? Should Donald Trump be ostracized from the Republican Party as you know it?
If it's Sunday, it's Meet the Press. For breaking news in our changing world, download the NBC News app.
January 20th, it's written in the Constitution, a new president will take office, and that is what has been going on today in Washington, D.C. Joe Biden has been sworn in as the 46th president of the United States. Kamala Harris, vice president, the first woman, the first black American, and the first Asian American to assume the office of the vice presidency. So we watch history being made this afternoon. We await a signing ceremony, one of the processes that happens on every inauguration day, and we will bring you those live pictures from the United States Capitol in a moment. But as you look at the East Front, it's been cleared for the moment, and the business has moved inside. Let's go to Peter Alexander, who has covered this for us this morning. And Peter, your thoughts? I think this is your first chance to weigh in on what you heard from the president's speech this afternoon.
Yeah, Savannah, we await the president and the first lady parading down Pennsylvania Avenue in front of the White House. And one of the things you may notice behind us, we have this stunning, gorgeous line of sight view of the White House because there's no reviewing stand this time around, of course, due to the COVID precautions, the protocols that are in place as a function of the Biden administration trying to be extra careful this go around. That means there's not a large crowd. Certainly there was no crowd for the inaugural address today, absent those dignitaries and others who surrounded Joe Biden when he delivered his remarks. But I do really think that the lack of an audience today was a benefit for Biden because it allowed him to speak directly to those cameras and ultimately to speak directly to all of us as Americans. This is an inauguration day that is being experienced so differently, not just for those here in person, surrounded by this fortress of steel, those 25,000 National Guard members and others, but by Americans around this country who for most of the last year have been experiencing their lives from home or through Zoom calls or on FaceTime with loved ones, unable to have those conversations.
And Peter, let me just jump in because I don't know if you can see it, but I just want to let our viewers know these are live pictures of the president signing a couple of, there's an inaugural proclamation. There are also cabinet nominations and sub-cabinet nominations. So this is some of the first official business of the president as he stands there surrounded by the leadership of the Congress as well as Vice President Harris right there. So this is one of the formalities that we expected to see and some of his first official work as president. Peter, you were saying.
Well, as we see Joe Biden get to work, and perhaps you can hear him, he's allowing the press to leave the room right there. You know, today is a day of pomp and pageantry, but is also a day of policy for Joe Biden, who is immediately getting to work. But just to get back to that thought about how Americans are experiencing this inauguration day differently by speaking directly into the cameras and speaking to us, I think it did deliver this message that we are experiencing in our own hearts right now, much the same way that he did last night when he and then Vice President-elect Kamala Harris and their families were there for the columns of light at the reflecting pool at the Lincoln Memorial for Americans to have this sort of shared this collective moment of catharsis. Garth Brooks in singing Amazing Grace, a cappella, asking Americans at home to join him. In many ways, Americans are just separated in not just physically, but in politically at this time. And his remarks today, I thought, allowed all Americans to be together again under one roof in many ways, even if this pandemic, this COVID crisis, doesn't actually allow that to occur.
All right, Peter, thank you. I'm going to turn now to Hugh Hewitt. He's a radio talk show host, author, and NBC News political contributor. And Hugh, you've also been a supporter of the president. I think I'm also joined by David French, an author and political commentator, senior editor of The Dispatch, another prominent conservative voice. And so let's talk about the future of the Republican Party. Hugh, I'll start with you. You have been a supporter of the former presidents of President Trump. And you heard that message today from President Biden saying to those who didn't support him in the election, hear me out, essentially give me a chance. Do you think that's possible?
Oh, yes. I thought it was a very fine speech. I think it started today. People will give him a chance. I particularly found appealing, we must end this uncivil war, Savannah. And that's actually an appeal to everyone who is on social media, everyone who appears as I am right now, as David is about to tone it down, turn it lower, listen. He quoted his mother, put yourself in other people's shoes. He appealed to Lincoln's better angels. It's not going to be recalled as the greatest bit of rhetoric that's ever been done in an inaugural event, but that appeal to end the uncivil war, which is far beyond Washington. It's in every dining room. It's in every restaurant. It's often been across social media. That was, for me, a much welcome moment. And I do believe that he can be very useful in getting people to gentle down.
You know, let me turn to you, David, about this very topic. I mean, this notion of healing and what it takes to heal and unify. And we saw what happened on January 6th, and it certainly seems that that has been, so far, an inflection point and a place where many Americans are saying, okay, that's too far, that's enough. It's time for us to lower the temperature, as Hugh just said.
Yeah, you know, what you have to realize is that millions and millions of Americans have been fed a steady diet of really grotesque misinformation, that Joe Biden will end the United States of America, that the Democrats want to sort of end the church and destroy the American Christian church, an unbelievable diet of misinformation that has led to a lot of radicalization. And that radicalization led to the January 6th attack that has sort of shocked a lot of Americans and awakened them to the challenge right now of this deep, deep division. And so I looked at that inauguration speech as Joe Biden addressing those sort of persuadable Americans who are shocked by where this country is right now and saying to them, look, what I want to do is to restore an environment where disagreement is normal again. It does not escalate into deep division. And that's part of the magic of the American democracy and the American constitutional republic is we have created a system that allows for disagreement without deep division. And I thought that was one of the most important aspects of the speech, along with the pageantry around it. When you have sort of a pop culture icon of Red America singing Amazing Grace, Garth Brooks singing Amazing Grace, it's a symbol, I think, of powerful cultural and religious symbol that Joe Biden is saying, I want to be president. For all of those Americans who are open to being persuaded to sort of join me in lowering the temperature, as you said.
And to hear Senator Blunt say Amazing Grace, that's as close as we have to a national song and a national prayer, something that we can do collectively. That, as we all know, to give me license here for a moment, music is a healer, Hugh. We really do know. The president also talked about that reclaiming of truth, and David just spoke eloquently about it, about this feast of lies that have been put out there. How do you feel about that? Do you think that we can turn the page on this era in which, you know, the old saying was you're entitled to your own opinion, you're not entitled to your own facts, but it has seemed that we've entered an era, Hugh, where people do seem to have their own facts and that you're not operating on a shared set of truth and fact. And do you feel that we may be able to leave that in our past now?
I think at the margins, that's always going to be difficult to get away from, because in a nation of 330 million, there's going to be a 1% on each end that are going to invent their own reality. But I'll point to yesterday, Savannah. Secretary Pompeo declared genocide in China against the Uyghur people. Later that afternoon, Tony Blinken, his incoming replacement, confirmed that they both agree on that. Yesterday, Tony Blinken said we're leaving the embassy in Jerusalem. That's something on which he agrees with the previous administration. I thought, in fact, most of the testimony I saw yesterday of soon-to-be cabinet members was consistent with the 98% in the middle. So I don't have any hope of kumbaya from the far left or the far right. That's not going to happen. But what David was talking about, the ability to have the conversation, for example, on the upcoming immigration debate. We've done this in 2006. We did this in 2013. This is the third time in 15 years that we will search for an immigration compromise. I hope we get there. It cannot be accomplished at a higher decibel. It has to be accomplished on an agreement of facts and an agreement on what do you have to say about this, what do you have to say about that. I actually have a great deal of confidence in Leader McConnell. I wrote in the Washington Post this week. He is the leader of the Republican Party right now. Mitch McConnell is the most powerful Republican. He is not a man of extraordinary outbursts, passions, or harsh words. He's a negotiator and a legislator, and I think that's a very good combination for right now.
Yeah, and Hugh, I mean, David, I assume you say amen to most of that. I mean, you both are conservatives. You come from different perspectives, but it is interesting because all of the incentives have been for the extremes, whether it's cable news or social media. You know, sometimes I've lamented, you know, where's the radical middle? Where all the just, and I don't mean centrism in terms of your political choices, but more in terms of your tone and your temperament. And, you know, nobody's waving a big sign that says, I'm open to argument, I'm open to persuasion, you know, and maybe that's where we need to get.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, I'm sad to say I like to hear Hugh's optimism about that it's a 1% issue on either side. I don't think that's the case. I think it's a lot more people have been radicalized than we like to think. Just for example, yesterday, you know, there's a huge problem with conservative media of misinformation, just an enormous problem. And so what did Fox do yesterday? It dismissed some of its finest journalists, fact-based journalists who'd gotten tough calls right, and then gave a person a primetime audition who had spread some of the worst of the Stop the Steal election lies. And this is sort of the granddaddy of them all in conservative media, seeming to double down on the very practices that put us where we are today. Just living in red America, I live in Tennessee. It is not a very small, tiny fringe who believes some of these wild conspiracy theories. It is a very common thing. So we have an amount of cultural repair here to do that is it's a far greater challenge than we like to think. And so it's a Republican Party that right now has a QAnon caucus in it. It has a Marjorie Taylor Greene who is in the same party with, say, a Nancy Mace. These people are very, very, very different. One is reality-based, one is conspiracy-based. And this is a battle the Republican Party is going to have to fight within itself. And we all have to hope and pray that the reality-based community of the GOP prevails over the conspiracy-based community.
Well, it's a good conversation to have and not one we can finish today, but I hope we can continue it. You both have written quite eloquently about it, and we're happy to have your perspectives. David French and Hugh Hewitt, thank you so much, and we'll see you a bit later.
Thank you.
Representative Jim Clyburn is a South Carolina congressman and was a key Biden supporter when it really counted during the primaries last year. Congressman, good to see you. Thanks for coming on. We just heard those voices. We've heard other voices from the right who right now are feeling good about what they heard from President Biden today and some hope that unity can take hold. What do you take away from that?
Well, thank you very much for having me, Lester. I feel good about it as well. I think it's the country wants to see us move forward together. I know that we are used to having political contests, and we all enjoy. I do enjoy campaigning. But when the campaign is over, it is time to come together and move forward together. This democracy, I've been saying for some time now, has been teetering on edge for the last several months. I think that the speech today sets a tone for us to march forward together. You know, I'm from South Carolina. I grew up with two senators, mostly throughout most of my life. Strom Thurmond on the right side of the aisle, Fritz Hollins on the left side. They worked very closely together. I worked very closely with Strom Thurmond to get things done for our state. When we were in that so-called undisclosed secure location 2 weeks ago, the first phone call I got was from Governor McMaster, who was the first governor to endorse Donald Trump. He's a very partisan Republican. But we are good friends, and we work together for the state of South Carolina. And he called me to make sure that I was all right. And then he said to me, and by the way, I'm going to ask the legislature to give me an additional $30 million so we can get your broadband program kick-started here in South Carolina. That's the way we need to be doing things going forward. And so I think that what Joe Biden said today is an indication of what you can expect from him going forward.
All right. Well, Congressman Clyburn, always great to talk to you. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, sir. And let's go to NBC's Tom Costello. He's on the Mall, and Tom has been covering the extraordinary and, yeah, we can say unprecedented security that's taken place to make sure that this inauguration went off without a hitch. Tom, we're still in the middle of the ceremony, but the main business has been done. We have a new president safely sworn in as we watch these live pictures from inside the United States Capitol.
And there's President.
Yep, absolutely. And this is exactly what National Guard leaders, generals were saying would happen. They were convinced that the security perimeters and parameters in place were going to ensure that there was a very safe process today. 25,000 National Guard troops, thousands of local, state, and federal officers on the ground here as well. We can tell you that there have been a couple of minor groups of individuals, like 100 people or less, on each side of the mall, not a lot, who came here to voice either support support for the inauguration or opposition for the inauguration, but peaceful and really not a big scene. One concern has been that, you know, a lot of the shop owners in D.C. who make their money off of tourism, they were hoping to sell their T-shirts and their hats and all the things you normally see at an inauguration, and yet they can't. And many of them had loaded up, anticipating that they would still be able to sell off their wares, but instead all the streets have been locked down. So now all of these folks who deal in these types of trinkets, they can't get rid of them. That's a concern.
Hold that thought. We want to watch Tom. We're sorry to hold that thought. We want to watch this gift ceremony taking place in the rotunda.
By those traditions, usually there's a painting at the front of that event that the chairman picks. This time, not knowing we were going to have an event until what we were going to do about an event until late, I asked Dr. Biden to help pick the painting, and this is the one that she recommended. The painting is landscape with rainbow. Rainbow, always a good sign. It's loaned to us for today from the Smithsonian American Art Museum. The artist, Dr. Robert Sheldon Duncanson, he was the best-known African-American painter in the years surrounding the Civil War. He was based in Cincinnati, encouraged by abolitionists who, among other things, sponsored a trip for him to do some study in Europe. This is a painting that he painted in 1859, and I think maybe it's sort of the classic America as a paradise painting that a lot of painters were doing then. But for him, a black artist painting this painting that's so much like an American utopia on the verge of a war that we would fight over slavery, makes all of that, I think, even more interesting in that while he faced lots of challenges, obviously was optimistic even in 1859 about America. And so, Dr. Biden, thanks for helping select this painting, and glad to have all four of you here as we move on to my good friend Senator Klobuchar.
I like the rainbow.
The rainbow is always a good sign. Let's hope so.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Door number 2. Here we are. Good. Mr. President, First Lady, Madam Vice President, and our very first second gentleman, on behalf of the American people, it is our honor to present these custom-made crystal vases commemorating your historic inauguration. Lennox, which you know is a great company, American company, has handcrafted these gifts for the past 9 presidential inaugurations. It is a good thing I don't have to hand them to you personally. They each weigh, with the base, 32 pounds. But combined 64. But Jill, I know, is very strong and could take them both. Exactly. But the Lennox company is actually based in Bristol, Pennsylvania, which you know, Mr. President, is a mere 132 miles from Scranton, since we know today all roads lead to Scranton. The team at Lennox has worked for months to capture the spirit of this inauguration and your incoming administration. Mr. President, your vase features the White House, and Vice President Harris's features the U.S. Capitol. The gifts represent the hope and the faith the American people have placed in you to move our country forward. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, Mr. President, Madam Vice President, while the pandemic has sadly limited our usual hospitality, as others have mentioned, I'm very glad we still carry on some of our favorite inaugural traditions. It's my honor and privilege to help present these flags of our nation that were flown over today's event here at the Capitol. Now, I have to make one point of personal privilege on behalf of the Senate. With all due respect to our distinguished speaker and our colleagues from the House, I have to note, not only did we just swear in a son and daughter of the Senate to these high offices, but indeed both these former senators skipped the House altogether. The Star-Spangled Banner is our greatest symbol of our endurance of the American idea. It flies over this building on triumphant days and on tragic ones, over all factions and all parties. And today this flag flew over our former colleague's inauguration as the very first female Vice President of the United States. So to our very distinguished former colleague, Madam Vice President, please accept this flag with the highest compliments and congratulations of the United States Senate.
The distinguished leader of the Senate pointed out that he has hosted this lunch for members of the Senate who have become president and vice president. But I have the privilege of giving the flag to the President of the United States, the flag that was flown when you were sworn in, Mr. President. This flag may it reflect all that is said about your inauguration. America united. May it be a symbol of the hope, the healing, and the just all of the enthusiasm that you have for our country. And as we heard the beautiful national anthem, when we're at the stadium and they say, is our flag still there? Then you say, play ball, right there. Play ball. So we're going to get ready to play ball. We're ready to go with the inspiration of our flag flying. But again, on behalf of the House of Representatives, it is my privilege to extend to you the flag that was flown the early moment that you were sworn in as President of the United States. Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Dr. Biden. Thank you. If we had the lunch, we would have had California wine. Is that not right? Madam Vice President, Mr. Emhoff, congratulations. With liberty and justice for all. Thank you.
And one of the traditions of inauguration, the exchange of gifts that taking place there, and leaders of both the House and Senate taking part.
But in a very 2021 way and nod to the pandemic, everyone's socially distanced, and we've got another set of gifts, photographs to be presented to the first couple. Let's listen. Here's Kevin McCarthy.
Technology, right? It's a good picture, too. President Biden, Vice President Harris, Dr. Biden, and Mr. Emhoff, on behalf of Republicans in Congress, congratulations. Very proud of you both. When President Washington was sworn in as the first president of the United States, only a handful of people saw the ceremony or heard the famous first inaugural address. Today, the inauguration is seen around the nation and indeed around the world. Yet the task facing the nation is no less momentous than it was in Washington's time. I listened to your speech today. You talked among the tension and division. Our task as leaders is to bind this nation's wounds and dedicate ourselves to the values of all Americans share together. With modern technology, just a few minutes ago, it captured in these pictures. History in the making, for all the world to see. This picture should serve as a reminder of that task that we have before us. As a very proud son of California, it is my honor to present to a very proud daughter of California as well. Today, Vice President Harris made history, and all of America should celebrate that. But we should also remember that this is not the end, but just the beginning. As leaders, we are judged not by our words, but by our actions. So let's go forth from here together, accomplish great things for the American people. And every time you look at this photo, remember the beginning of the job we have to do. Congratulations.
Madam Vice President, Mr. Imhoff, Dr. Biden, Mr. President. No, Joe, you're Mr. President. And we are so proud of that. Dr. Biden, he makes you call him Mr. President? Marriage is about to get rocky, I can tell. On behalf of the Joint Congressional Committee on the Inaugural Ceremonies, I too am proud. More than that, I'm ecstatic to present the two of you this picture. A testament to technology and a testament to history. Mr. President, in your speech, you talked about faith. You talked about tribulations, but you talked about victory. The Johnson brothers wrote a great hymn. You know it well, Mr. President. Today, we have a new day. And that hymn came out of faith and out of deep trouble into hope. And they said, facing the rising sun of our new day begun, let us march on till victory's won. That's what your speech was about. And that's why we are so proud and ready to march with you, President Biden. God bless.
And they're both different. Yeah. Get the whole family in there. Put your head in there.
Let's bring in Doris Kearns Goodwin, author and presidential historian, has been watching all this take place. You know, Doris, I guess it's comforting to see some of these small but rituals of the inauguration, a sense of normalcy, touchstones, if you will.
Thank you. I couldn't agree with you more. I was just thinking emotion is welling up as I'm watching this ceremony, which is an ordinary ceremony, but somehow it's become an extraordinary thing in this day and age to see the leaders of both sides warm with each other, gracious with each other, laughing with each other. It just shows the hunger right now we have for that kind of leadership.
We've heard a lot of positive comments about the speech today, both from the left and the right. Given what transpired on January 6th, has that given this new president perhaps more space than he might ordinarily have had?
I think in some ways it has. And I think what he showed today was the kind of person that's fit for the moment. You know, when people look back on this speech, it's more like a fireside chat of FDR's, which was simple, straightforward, authentic, trustworthy, than the soaring rhetoric of one of his inaugurals, because FDR knew he was speaking to the people in their own homes, and I think that's what he was doing today. And somehow, if he can rebuild trust in certain numbers of people, first maybe in the moderates in the House and the Senate, and then maybe more and more people, that trust will be a source of power. Because right now, less than 20% of the people trust in leadership, trust in government. It used to be 77% during the Great Depression and World War II, ending only with first Vietnam and the credibility gap, and then Watergate, and then these last years. And there was something about the everydayness of the speech that I think will strike historians as fit for him. You know, in certain sense, when he talked about that incredible moment that you never know what fate is going to deal you, it reminded me, in a certain sense, when Nancy Pelosi just said play ball, of the everydayness of Lou Gehrig. I mean, he was known as the Iron Horse because he went to baseball every day despite injuries for 2,130 games, and then got hit, of course, by ALS. So fate came to him. But then he makes that statement, I consider myself the luckiest man on the face of the earth. And I think in some ways that's what Biden is projecting, that he's been through so much, but he feels like he's the luckiest man because he's here to meet this crisis, and he may well have the temperament that's absolutely fit for it, as we see in the contrast between 2 weeks ago and today.
And you talk about building trust. May his opportunity, his first big opportunity, be COVID and the vaccine, this 100 million doses in 100 100 days. If he can do that, how does that open up the playing field for him?
No question. I think you're just dead right. That's the foundation on which everything else will depend in some ways. It was the same thing for FDR. He had to resolve the banking crisis, that people couldn't get their money out of banks before he could do anything else. And he said that was his first priority. So dealing with the virus being out of control, getting that stimulus bill through the Congress, hopefully with some bipartisan votes, getting the economy coming back, and getting that 100 million vaccines into people's arms, that's setting a target. That's a really good thing that leaders do. You make people believe you can do the impossible and make it possible. And if he can do that, I think that, and get the virus under control and begin to get the economy back, then all the rest of the systemic things that he may hope to do will have a chance. But that's the key. Absolutely, you're right.
All right, Doris, thank you very much. We're looking at the east front, the steps on the east front of the Capitol, where the president will emerge shortly. There will be a pass in review before he departs the Capitol.
Yeah, and then we'll see some of the congressional leaders getting out and getting in position. This is the review of troops, the military pass and review, as you said, where it's a traditional it's part of the ceremony for the new president to survey the military. And as we watch this unfold, let's bring in Eugene Robinson to the conversation. He's an associate editor and columnist for the Washington Post and NBC News political contributor. And on a day when history is made, there's a particular kind of history. And Eugene, it's Kamala Harris, the first female vice president, the first Black American to be vice president, and the first Asian American to be vice president. And so a lot of history, and worth pausing and just soaking that in for a moment.
It is huge. It is a huge milestone, a huge step for this country. You know, in retrospect, what took us so long, other countries have had women as leaders, women in national office. But this is a huge deal, and for it to be a woman of African American and South Asian descent, again, breaks boundaries and is an inspiration, if you think about it, just to millions of Americans who now can see themselves in that. Now see their girls across this country who see possibility that just simply wasn't there before. And so that's just one of the aspects in which this was a day we will long remember. But that's certainly one of the most important aspects of it. And history will remember this day for that, as well as being for the end of the Trump era in the White House, which a time of great tumult in this country.
Yeah, we almost have to pause, though, and not only Vice President Harris, but when you look at the amount of diversity on this presidential cabinet, it is quite extraordinary.
Yeah, it is. It is the most diverse cabinet we've ever had, really. It is more diverse than President Obama's cabinet, although slightly different context, but it is a cabinet that looks like America, and it looks like the America that we are, in fact, becoming, and that's been part of the uncivil war, as President Biden called it in his inaugural address, that's being waged now in this country. The war between the America that was, which was a whiter America, an America that did not give this sort of space to women, this sort of space to members of minority groups, and the America that is becoming, which is the more diverse, more multicultural America that we see around us and that we see reflected in the cabinet, and so that is we'll remember this moment. This has been a process of transition, and it's not going to happen overnight. We're not all going to join hands and sing Kumbaya, but as Doris Kurtz Goodwin said, Joe Biden could be the man for this moment because he straddles these worlds and he understands both. And he could be the figure who helps us through this demographic and economic and public health transition that we have to go through, and who tries to get us all on the same page. You know, he talked about how there is truth and there are lies, and one of his big challenges will be to get us all on the same page in terms of what is true and what is not.
All right, Eugene Robinson, thank you.
Let's turn to Craig Melvin, who is right there on the east front of the Capitol as we await this portion of the proceedings today. Craig, what are you seeing as you watch the day unfold?
You know, just to piggyback off that last discussion there, talking about the barriers that Senator Harris is breaking. We made a lot about the gender barriers and the racial barriers. There's also a geographic barrier. Kamala Harris is the first vice president from the West Coast in more than 60 years. The last one being Richard Nixon to Dwight Eisenhower. I spent some time with her shortly after she was elected as we watched the president and the first lady get ready to descend the steps. They're going to make their way to Arlington National Cemetery from here. We're told that his predecessors have been there for a bit. President Clinton, President Obama, President Bush, all waiting for the wreath-laying ceremony to start. But I spent some time with Senator Harris shortly after the election. And it also isn't lost on her, Lester, Savannah, that she's the first graduate of an HBCU, a historically black college and university. She's also a proud member of a sorority, Alpha Kappa Alpha. She's an AKA, and it would be hard to overstate how much pride graduates of HBCUs and members of that sorority have in Senator Kamala Harris as the passing review gets ready to begin.
that is a moment where history reaches out and grabs you right down to the Yankee Doodle Dandy. We heard the review of troops, the Passant review just got underway, and now the president and first lady will get in their car where they are headed to Arlington National Cemetery for the traditional wreath laying. And waiting for them there are former presidents Clinton, Bush, and Obama, who will take part in that ceremony.
Check out the license plate.
46. Okay, they're ready. As I think Craig actually reported earlier that the Beast, as they call the presidential limo, because it's of course outfitted with all the latest security razzle dazzle, has been now outfitted for the new president. And a good eye there, Lester, with the new license plate as well.
Premium sound system and some other things they put in there.
Yes, exactly. The oil was just changed. So we'll watch this departure, and I think we've got Senator Cory Booker, Democrat of New Jersey, with us now. And Senator, what did it mean to you to see this take place, especially when 2 weeks ago it was such a different scene in the United States Capitol?
You know, I think this was such an important day, and I think a lot of us on both sides of the aisle, the senators who we were sitting behind, felt that this day had even a deeper sense of meaning after seeing what happened in the dawning days of 2021 with a siege upon our Capitol, having to flee the Senate floor. And I think that in the face of that, this has a moment that's gone from deep hurt to profound hope. And I'm just really celebrating the continuance of our democracy, above and beyond what it just means politically for our country.
Do you feel better about America today, and not from a fellow Democrat to the Joe Biden Democrat, but just from the notion that you're hearing senators and Congress members on the right now who are talking about the tone and a change of tone? Is there I guess, has the table been set by what we've been through the past 2 weeks?
I think Maya Angelou said it best. You must face many defeats, but never be defeated. And I think what happened on the 6th for a lot of senators, it was sort of a wake-up, a stunning defeat for our nation. But I think today shows that our truth as a nation will go marching on. And I'm very happy to hear affirmations in the private conversations on those bleachers amongst senators who feel a sense of a new day. And I tell you, when the clouds came over and the snow came, and then just around the time that Vice President Harris and President Biden were speaking, you just saw the sun come out and even a warmth spread over us in the stands. It was a deeply meaningful moment. And I think that a lot of folks who are just tired of the rancor and the manufactured outrage and the wounds, frankly, being inflicted by so many, I think that all of us are welcoming and want to be a part of, or at least many of us should, want to be a part of the healing that Joe Biden talked about, the finding of the higher ground that comes from common ground.
And Senator, that'll be music to the ears of many people who are listening. At the same time, there is an impeachment trial, the House sending articles of impeachment over, and senators will have to sit in judgment, 100 jurors of the former President Trump, with the vote of whether to convict. And how does that, for you, play into this feeling that you have today of unity and wanting to go forward? How are you reconciling those two things? Are you hoping that Democrats make quick work of it? How do you hope this plays out?
Well, I've been a senator a short time, and it's stunning to me that I will have sat through 2 impeachment trials. And there is a difference in this one than the last. The last one, there was so much bravado and entrenchment and language of condemnation on both sides of the aisle. Now there is a little more humility, I think, amongst a lot of the actors. I'm not saying it's absent those other emotions from last time, but I think that there's some people are being more circumspect. Some people are waiting to see the kind of arguments. We actually know that a lot of this story is unfolding by the hour as the law enforcement investigations are now seeing more evidence of coordination, of conspiracy. So I see, not totally, but you already saw on the House side more bipartisanship in this in the actual impeachment. And I think that you're going to see some more humility in this trial on both sides as we weigh the gravity of the charges that will be presented before us.
How did Mitch McConnell's words change that space and change that outlook?
Look, I was very emotional when we returned to the Senate floor that night, and very hurt and angry, frankly, when I saw the images of the Confederate flags, of the Nazi sayings, of horrific speaking of genocides not going far enough. And I remember sitting there full of just hurt and rage. And then Mitch McConnell spoke, and I did not expect to hear him so firmly defend the institution of the United States Senate, the sanctity of the Capitol, and the righteousness of what we were doing to create a peaceful transition of power, and how he was upset that there had been an assault. And so I just say that to a lot of us who have grown cynical about a side of the political aisle that is not ours, that there are common bonds that bond us that are deeper, that can, in times of crisis, be affirmed, that remind us that we are still one nation. And so I, as a guy who can write a dissertation on my disagreements with Mitch McConnell, in that moment, I found something that just helped to keep burning the fires within me that have an affinity, a love of country, of our traditions, and a hope, a real hope that we can do big things together.
Senator Cory Booker, thank you for being with us. And as we've been speaking, we've been watching the presidential motorcade now leave the Capitol. I think we have a map we could perhaps put up to show you. Yeah, there's the Capitol, of course, and the route will next take them to Arlington National Cemetery, where the president, along with the other living former presidents, minus Jimmy Carter, will lay a wreath at the tomb of the unknown.
So we'll continue to keep our eyes on that motorcade as it makes its way across Washington and over the river to Arlington National Cemetery. I want to bring in Chuck Todd and Andrea Mitchell, our two Washington veterans here. And Andrea, there's this fascinating behind the scenes. We were talking earlier in the day on the lighter side about the scurrying behind the scenes, as now there are new occupants of the White House who will be arriving in a matter of hours, and just the absolute logistical lift that's involved there. There's also, of course, the continuity of government. And in a matter of moments, at the stroke of noon, an entirely new administration comes into place. And those duties, those solemn duties that belong to the commander-in-chief, are passed. And we saw wordlessly, and there was no image of it, but yet that work has now been done. Can you tell us more about it?
Savannah, it's fascinating. Chuck and I have been talking about this because there are actually multiple nuclear footballs. It's referred to as the nuclear football. It's actually technically the presidential emergency satchel. You always see the military aide carrying it in his right hand on the way to and from Marine One or to and from Air Force One, most often when you see it. And in this case, this is the first time in the nuclear age where the nuclear football was not passed from one president's military aide to the new president's military aide at the same moment, because President Trump was on his way to Florida and then arriving in Florida. So there were two nuclear footballs today, and at the stroke of 11:59:59, the nuclear codes changed, and the operational the nuclear football that was up on Capitol Hill with the military aide standing behind, now President Biden took over, and that one became operational, which basically means that the new president, if it were in this dire emergency, it's never happened that we know of, identifies himself or maybe someday herself to the Pentagon, to the National Military Command Center in the Pentagon, and then they take it from there once he or she has identified himself.
By the way, guys, one other little, I guess, historical footnote. It is now a footnote, but about 3 weeks ago, this is just as right after 2 weeks ago, obviously, after the insurrection, and there was a lot of wonders if would Donald Trump finish his term. And Lester, you pointed out that the license plate says 46. But believe it or not, the inaugural committee, the Biden folks, had 47 signage ready to go. In the under the because they thought there was at least a not 0% chance that Mike Pence could have been president for a day or two or when all of that speculation was heated. And just in case they had, you've seen the 46 signage occasionally, they, believe it or not, had everything ready to go in case he was technically going to be 47.
Interesting watching this.
President Trump stepped down as he was being urged to.
Yeah, watching this motorcade, and you guys can tell me what street that's on, our folks in Washington, but the new president is
That'd be Independence.
Independence.
And right, yeah, that's the Air and Space Museum right there, Lester, that they're about to go by.
And he's seeing the walls of troops that are there to secure that area. You likely saw it on his way to the Capitol today, but a reminder of the enormous challenges, the immediate addressable items that are on his list.
Lester, look at that a minute, and I tell you, I've been a bit shaken by this every once in a while. We've had these gates at different times, right? They've not only put in this secure fencing, they've put razor wire on top of it. I mean, it really does feel like at times that you're at a military base in a foreign country.
Yeah, I've been
where
to
you're
the green
worried
zone.
about hostilities.
I've been to the green zone in Iraq, and it is very similar. It's a sterile area that, you know, it's a no-go land except for...
It's the razor wire that's jarring, I'll just be frank.
You know, you see it also in Kabul and other conflict zones whenever I've been traveling with secretaries of state or with the vice president, or with presidents back in the day. But also, Lester, in past inaugurals, I've been on the flatbed truck for the parade.
Yes,
so
you
I'm
have.
seeing this for the first time this way, but I'm usually on that flatbed
We
truck
want you on the flatbed,
with the camera pool, because there's a parade and there are throngs of people and you don't see this fence wire. And then as this time, they're of course not going back to the White House, they're first going to Arlington Cemetery. So they are going right now on Independence. Soon will be past the ellipse, and they're heading to the Memorial Bridge to Arlington Cemetery. That bridge has been closed for a week now, but obviously it's not closed to them. And then we're going to see the laying of the wreath with the former presidents. And there was that grace note, Lester and Savannah, of President-elect Biden, well, President Biden in his inaugural address, rather, as soon as he was sworn in, paying a tribute to Jimmy Carter, the only former president not here, because just like 3 of the Supreme Court justices at his age, it was not deemed safe at all to travel in COVID. And the 3 eldest Supreme Court justices, 3 of the 9, were not present on the steps today.
He says he called President Carter, I think he said yesterday.
Right, last night.
Last night. All right, we're going to take a break.
They're getting close to the MLK Memorial here, I imagine, and as well, that's coming up here on the left, if folks are wondering where on sort of Independence we are.
All right, we're going to squeeze in a quick break and get back to you guys and get back, hopefully, as the president makes his way to Arlington. Our Inauguration Day coverage continues on NBC after this.
For breaking news in our changing world, download the NBC News app.
We are a country of laws, a democracy built on free and fair elections, where the majority, not the mob, rules, and no rioter, no act of insurrection or domestic terror, no desperate despot can take away all we have built, all that we stand for, and all we hold dear.
Make no mistake, what happened that day was an insurrection against the United States government. Is this the beginning of something or the end of something? Should Donald Trump be ostracized from the Republican Party as you know it?
If it's Sunday, it's Meet the Press.
For breaking news in our changing world, Download the NBC News app.
The president's motorcade going across the Potomac River outside of the District of Columbia into Virginia. Arlington National Cemetery is the next stop where 3 former presidents await the new president and vice president. There will be a wreath laying for former President Obama, former President Bush, former President Clinton there to aid in that particular part of the ceremony. And then afterwards, there will be a brief parade, a virtual parade, but then a procession on the streets of Washington as President Biden and the First Lady arrive at the White House a little later this afternoon. We want to turn to Gabe Gutierrez, who is on the streets of Washington as this motorcade makes its way slowly but surely, and as Lester was just observing, in the midst of unprecedented security in our nation's capital.
Yeah, that's right, Savannah. As you mentioned, in a huge security presence here, you can see police officers behind me, and this is something that we've seen really throughout the day. And Savannah, as we look around, you can tell this is obviously such a much smaller crowd than you would normally see on an inauguration day, where you would see hundreds of thousands of people here. Really, all we've seen throughout the day is a smattering of Biden supporters, a few Trump supporters as well. Very small crowds, though. A lot of media here as well, and a huge security presence that we've really been seeing, Savannah, for the last several days. Of course, more than 20,000 National Guard troops here throughout the district, really locking down the Capitol. You can see the razor wire in the fencing that's been set up around this entire area. Of course, there was the threat of potentially violent protests, not just here, but at state capitals across the country. But thankfully, that has really not materialized here. Of course, though, there is still that huge presence here. You see National Guard troops in the distance making their way onto the grounds. Again, something we've seen really here throughout the day. But thankfully, Savannah, no major issues so far. We did see some of those supporters listen as President Biden was sworn in. Savannah?
All right, Gabe, thank you. I don't know if we still have Chuck and Andrea with us, but I was thinking to both of you about President Biden and just those words, because here is somebody who began his political career as a very young man. In fact, so young, I don't think he was eligible for his Senate seat until he was actually sworn in while he was running for election. And now he's the oldest president we have, having tried to be president, run for president a couple of times unsuccessfully. And yet we've heard again and again our different historians and friends and people who know Joe Biden saying it feels that he is the man for this moment. Yeah. And I thought I was really struck by what he said, because it was one of those sentences in the speech that had so much in it that need not be said, where he said, "You never know what fate will deal you." And here's somebody who, of course, had great loss at the beginning of his career, having lost his wife in a car accident and his new baby, suffered a brain aneurysm and almost died in the 80s. Lost his beloved son, Beau, at the age of 46, just a few years ago. You know, when you think of that trajectory, boy, did he have it right. You never know what fate will deal you, Chuck.
Look, it is the phrase "character is destiny," and that's the thing, right? I mean, you go to Joe Biden's character, everything he's gone through, every personal loss he's dealt with, every professional setback he's dealt with, it's almost as if he had to go through all of those moments in order to be ready for this moment, right? And that's, I think, that to me is what I heard there. And, you know, Savannah, I'd love for you to comment on another thing. Joe Biden's faith, I have to tell you, I think, you know, whether you yourself are a person of faith, I think that tenor and tone was so needed today more than any other day. There was a sense of, you know, I had somebody email me and said, boy, he would have been a terrific priest. And I'm guessing old Joey, you know, maybe that was a dream of his at one time too. But look, I am not as religious as some other people, but I find that him grounding himself in faith, and it's very authentic with him. I'm not gonna. I don't like to question anybody's religious beliefs, but he wears it on his sleeve, and it's very meaningful to him. And I think it really informs who he is in a way that I think is why he feels like he meets this moment. But I'm curious of what you thought of that, Savannah.
Yeah, I think it is. I mean, you asked me because I am a person of faith. I do think that he has that quiet resoluteness within him when he was, talking about the hymns and the anthems and where he's calling on that sense of purpose and that sense of higher purpose, and yes, that sense of humility. I think that is something that is that's a telltale sign of someone's faith, his particular Catholic faith. The fact that he started his day in church and in this area breaking with tradition because he wanted to attend Catholic Mass and inviting the other leaders. And I think that that is something that's very genuine with him and really pervades not just one section of his life, but all of his life. So I think I agree with you. You can hear that in the speech, and you can hear that in his character. And I think I can't imagine any president not going in and seeing the job. You have to have humility and a sense of being overwhelmed by the task before you and the responsibility that you have. 300 million Americans counting on you. And as I said, as a person of faith, I think that's when you need that humility. That's when you want to say those prayers and call on something greater than yourself.
Well, in fact, Savannah, I think that faith is so real and so authentic that is communicated certainly to all of the members of Congress, of the House and the Senate, who knew him before, and they see that now every day, and they saw that today and heard it in his speech. I'm sure what he is thinking and feeling right now also at Arlington, he's always thinking about Bo. He thinks about Bo every day. He says that Bo is his inspiration. He just said that yesterday when he was at the National Guard Center named for Bo in Wilmington. But also Jill Biden has written about how she lost her faith after Bo died. And she said she recovered it partly through the help of a prayer partner in South Carolina in a black church that they had frequented very often. They often vacationed down there. And they knew a lot of people in South Carolina, and this woman came up to her after Bo died and had told her how much she's praying for her, and they've been in touch and pray with each other often several times a week, even during the campaign. So they get on the phone or they're texting. So these people are really motivated by that, as you well understand. And though any president would feel overwhelmed by the awesome power and responsibility, I can't, looking through history, have asked Michael Beschloss this question and others far more expert than I. Has any president had to deal with the declining economy, the joblessness, 400,000 deaths, no clear pathway towards getting the vaccinations and getting the response past this surge and getting us on the other direction and the other trajectory, as well as the problems overseas and America's reputation after an insurrection at the Capitol that was unprecedented in our history going back other than to 1814. I just can't imagine it.
Yeah, he's been very forthright in many of his speeches, especially talking about COVID, and just a week or two ago talking about it's going to get worse before it gets better, managing expectations while at the same time expressing a sense of empathy. And as we watch his motorcade now make its way onto the grounds of Arlington National Cemetery, what you saw a few moments ago, the 21-gun salute. As the president arrives here, you'll note that he finishes almost every speech with the words, "And God bless our troops." His son Bo, of course, a soldier. This will be a solemn moment, as it should be. It is a place that if you visit Arlington National Cemetery, it's easy to get misty just walking or driving through. It's a powerful statement to bravery and service and all the things that we hold so dear in this country.
Well, and it's also an acknowledgement that, there lying in those graves are people who fought and died for this country and died for the right that we celebrate and mark today, which is democracy. And so, as this motorcade weaves through tombstone after tombstone, making its way to the tomb of the unknown soldier where those former presidents will be, it's a proper moment and a proper pause of reflection to say that, it's on these shoulders that we stand and that we are able to see this great nation carry on and have this peaceful transfer of power. It didn't come cheap, and for some, they gave everything for it.
The Obamas, the Bushes, the Clintons, along with the president and vice president and their spouses will lay the wreaths at the Tomb of the Unknown. I believe motorcade pulling, and I think they were going to be in a tented area just for a brief time before emerging for this ceremony.
Major General Omar J. Jones IV, Commanding General of the United States Army Military District of Washington, and Mrs. Tracy Jones. The Armed Forces Honor Guard and the United States Army Band are formed and awaiting the President and Vice President to move to the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier to place the wreath.
And President Biden becoming the commander-in-chief at a time that the number of American troops has been reduced overseas, most notably Afghanistan.
Something President Trump was very focused on doing, and made a central campaign promise to bring soldiers home. And as has been noted in the last 2 weeks, this buildup of Guard troops in the nation's capital far exceeds the footprint we have in either Afghanistan or Iraq right now.
Andrew, you've no doubt spent time at Arlington. What can you reflect for us?
Well, of course, we go there on Memorial Day. Every president does go there on Memorial Day. I've gone there for burials of notable figures, and it is inspiring. There's also, of course, the section for those who died in Iraq and Afghanistan, and that is very memorable, certainly to this new generation of families, the mourning of those lost in those wars. We actually now have a new acting Secretary of Defense, by the way, as of now, as of 12 o'clock. There's an acting CIA director who is the former deputy CIA director, David Cohn. So there has been a change of command in past transitions that began far earlier because of all of the delays and the legal impediments and the political impediments. They did not get their national security team confirmed. They did hold hearings yesterday, and they're trying to get unanimous consent to get that team confirmed, but they don't have a team confirmed. So among the papers that President Biden was signing there in the Capitol were cabinet nominations and also the acting Secretary of Defense, I believe, and the acting CIA director and other key positions that need to be held because you have the continuity of government. But the quiet of Arlington, Lester, it's just it's a place to be prayerful, to be thoughtful, and to pay honor to all who have served and died and to their families and all the survivors.
I think it's the single most important memorial in Washington. I've always said that. Anybody that comes here, I always say you must do this.
And the Vietnam Memorial, where people still come and lay flowers.
All of American history is right here. That's what in Arlington. There's so much history. It's very important.
And right before Memorial Day, there is the laying of the flags, the ceremony where flags are placed on every one of those graves.
We also saw a solemn moment last evening, Chuck and Andrea and Lester, at the Lincoln Memorial. It was brief but powerful, where President Biden and Vice President Harris, on the eve of their inauguration, went to pause and remember the 400,000 Americans who have died from COVID in the last year. And it's just the scale and the number of those lost is really hard to get your arms around when you think that 1 year ago, this was something that was unknown to us. just really coming into the fore, and so much has been lost in such a little time. So, this is one of those moments where inauguration is part celebration, part ceremonies, part soaring rhetoric, and in this moment, part solemnity and tears. And
I don't think there's any greater contrast between President Biden and his predecessor than on the issue of COVID. The outgoing president often didn't seem to want to speak to it. And you could argue that Joe Biden founded his appeal, his campaign, around the idea of wrapping his arms around it and embracing it and confronting it.
Now we're seeing the former presidents assemble for this wreath laying, the Clintons, the Obamas, and the Bushes. Last time Chuck and Andrea that this group of ex-presidents were together were for former President George H.W. Bush's funeral in 2018, and I believe President Trump. I'm trying to remember if he.
I think at the John Lewis Memorial.
At the John Lewis Memorial.
Yeah, I think they all three went to the John Lewis Memorial just recently.
But all of them have developed a certain relationship over the years. There's something about in the post-presidency that surpasses politics and the old campaigns, and just in that common understanding of the difficulties of the job.
There has been such an interesting, especially the relationship between the Clintons, Bushes, and Obamas. And in many ways, the Bushes are they're the ones, they don't just link in history technically, but also the Bushes slightly closer to the Clintons, but the Bushes also becoming close with the Obamas. Right. It's interesting. It's not necessarily, as predictable as you might think, but it sort of helps, this picture helps us today. And when we get the Bidens there together, it's an important sort of there's your continuity
exactly
of history.
Well, I think that's why the Biden committee,
with an outlier from the last 4 years,
the Biden inaugural committee wanted this symbolism very strongly. We saw the relationship, Savannah and Lester and Chuck, between Michelle Obama and George W. Bush. Little moments, even at President Bush 41's funeral, passing of the lifesaver or the mint, the laugh, the gestures, and certainly between Bill Clinton and the Bushes.
Right. They're brothers from other. What did W?
Brothers from another mother.
Brothers from another mother. They, one point, right? That Bill Clinton became an adopted Bush there for a while.
Through service, actually, through the typhoon and going to Thailand together.
Chuck, you were talking earlier about Joe Biden being perhaps the most experienced person ever to assume the presidency, having been a United States Senator, Vice President for 8 years. And President Obama, other former presidents we see here have talked about that moment when it really hits you. When you step into the Oval Office on the day of your inauguration and it hits you, you're in charge now, you're commander-in-chief. And I wonder your thoughts about that, given that in this case, President Biden, he knows what to expect. He's been there. He's been in all the rooms, whether it's the, bin Laden raid or passage of health care or, any number of foreign crises. He has been there. And yet you do wonder, is there going to be that moment where he realizes, okay, I'm in the Oval Office. I'm not number two. It's me.
You know, Savannah, there's a moment that stuck with me, and it was during an off-the-record with then Vice President Biden, and this is in the first term. This was, I believe, in the first year, and you know, we'd regularly go back there for off-the-records with him. He was always a very accessible vice president, and he said, you know, I used to think, I used to say, boy, I was ready to be president. He thought he said this in 09. He thought he was ready to be president as a senator for as long as he was. He said, I realized if there's the only job that might prepare you to be president, he said, is vice president. And he goes, and I'm not even sure that does. He admitted that it was eye-opening. You know, hear what he thought. He had been a senator he'd watched all these presidents, and yet when he went in as vice president, he was like, oh my God, you don't fully realize it. And that was his reaction, Savannah, as vice president. So I can only imagine, and yes, I think he and George H.W. Bush, right? I mean, in our era, modern time, with respect, government service, respect for it, being vice presidents, I think it does help, and I do think you will see that experience pay off early in relationships with Congress. Whether it is sustainable, that's our politics in the future. But I think you'll see this experience pay dividends in the first 6 months.
And, you know, I think, Chuck, and Andrea, and we bring Kristen Welker into this conversation, too. I think it's part of the reason it's so fitting, actually, to make this stop on your way to the White House. Because above all, the duty of the president is to protect and defend Americans, to be the commander-in-chief of our armed forces. And here, in the starkest of pictures, in the gravestones of soldiers who have fallen over hundreds of years in this country, are those whose lives you now hold in your hands. And all the former presidents have talked about that great weight that they feel as we start to see the Bidens come in. And Kristen, you can join the conversation if you would, because, you know, as we said, Joe Biden's certainly experienced and ready for this moment, but can you ever really be ready?
Well, and that is, of course, what is weighing so heavily on President Biden as he prepares to tackle all of the crises that he's now facing. This is a tradition that he shared when he was Vice President-elect Biden with then-President-elect Obama back in 2009, 2 days before Obama's inauguration. The two laid a wreath at the tomb of the unknown soldier. The two men very close, so it's notable to see them together here today. And again, you have to think about Beau Biden and that loss and everything that it meant to President Biden and how it has brought him here today and arguably made him uniquely ready for this moment, because right now he is poised to lead a country that is dealing with loss, that is dealing with pain, and that is ailing. And that is why he has spoken in such personal terms every time he speaks about COVID and every time he speaks about this fight. And of course, yesterday, in his remarks before leaving Delaware, he said it's Beau who should be president right now. And I remember that back in 2015 and 2016, when there was discussion about whether then Vice President Biden would become a presidential candidate, and he was mulling it very seriously, and he went back and forth. And the one factor that made him unable to throw his hat into the ring at that time was that he was still in mourning, Savannah and Lester and Chuck and Andrea. And so he said he could not do it. He could not give it his all at that time. And what you are seeing now is someone who has, yes, been a senator for decades, a vice president for 2 terms, and someone who has dealt with loss over and over again and who brings that to bear on his leadership. And that's certainly at the forefront right now at this very heavy moment as he visits Arlington National Cemetery, which, as you say, these are soldiers. More than 400,000 veterans buried there, along with their family members who gave their lives for this very democracy. Savannah.
President and Vice President now walking onto the plaza. We'll hear the national anthem next.
Present arms!
President, Madam Vice President, please come back to the spot.
Set! Arms! Order! Arms!
President, I would ask you to please come back. Madam Vice President, please come back.
And that concludes the ceremony at Arlington National Cemetery with President Biden, Vice President Harris, and 3 former presidents of the United States, all coming to pay homage to soldiers who have given their last full measure of devotion to this country. And as we watch the former presidents walk up the steps and go back inside, I want to turn to Jeremy Bash, Chief of Staff of the CIA and the Defense Department under President Obama, and NBC News contributor. And Jeremy, you know Arlington National Cemetery very well. What does it mean that the new president comes here and that today he's joined by former presidents as well?
Well, Savannah, when you hear that lone bugler play taps, it just sends chills down your spine because that's hallowed ground. I grew up in Arlington. We used to keep our windows open during the summer nights, and we would hear taps play as the sun set on those who gave everything for our country. And I remember Joe Biden, when he was vice president, attending a ceremony at Dover Air Force Base, welcoming home fallen heroes of our country, some 24 Navy SEALs who were killed in a helicopter crash in Afghanistan. This was a couple of months after the successful Navy SEAL operation against the bin Laden compound. And I remember after he greeted all the families and he and President Obama were there, Joe Biden turned to some of the staff that was there and he said, this is the toughest part of the job. And not only did he lose his own family members, some of whom, like Beau Biden, as you referenced, served downrange in Iraq in wartime, but he also has had to console and condole those who've lost loved ones in battle. And he knows that the biggest burden you have as a commander-in-chief is to send our best and brightest, our men and women in uniform, into harm's way. And him coming to Arlington today, I think, is a signal that he understands the great costs, the great sacrifices that people have made for our country and for our freedom.
Hey, Jeremy, as we noted a little while ago, there are fewer American service members deployed overseas than there were even only a few months ago. The goal of the Trump administration was to reduce that footprint overseas. But what does that leave this president? What challenges are out there? What things do we not know that may affect the future posture?
Well, probably the most important looming threat is the threat from China. China's rise, China's effort to dominate the Indo-Pacific and really export its model to countries across Europe, Africa, and Latin America. But that may not be the most pressing challenge. I think the most pressing challenge is getting COVID under control by working with other countries, because, of course, it's a global pandemic. If we solve it here at home, but other countries still have the virus raging, it's not going to do us very good. And then there are the pressing challenges of the nuclear programs of Iran, which has been rebuilding and redeveloping its nuclear capacity after the United States pulled out of the Iran deal. And, of course, North Korea remains out there with probably 50 nuclear weapons worth of material, several ICBMs that can hit the United States. Those technology advancements made by North Korea happened over the last 4 years. We haven't gotten a lot for the bromance diplomacy that Trump and Kim Jong-un had. And so Biden is going to be facing some very significant, very tough national security challenges in the weeks and months ahead.
All right, Jeremy, thank you so much. And the president's motorcade will momentarily depart Arlington National Cemetery, go across the bridge over the river and back into the streets of Washington, D.C., where that inaugural parade, such as it is this year, given the pandemic and security, will take place. So we want to turn now to Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders, who joins us now. And Senator, there's a lot of talk today, and it's hopeful talk of unity, comes from the president, wants to set a new tone. Less polarization. You're a straight talker. How do you feel about that? Do you think there's a possibility of really working together in Washington?
Well, I would love to see it. This country faces, as the president mentioned in his inaugural remarks, unprecedented crises in terms of the pandemic, in terms of the economy, in terms of climate change, in terms of racial justice, immigration, income and wealth inequality, you name it, we got it. And I would hope very much that my Republican colleagues feel the pain of so many working class people in this country who are trying to feed their kids, trying not to get evicted from their homes, trying to be able to go to a doctor and pay the bills. We got crises, and we got to go forward, and I look forward to working with Republicans who I hope will join us.
Do you sense a palpable change among Republicans that might move the needle toward unity?
Well, we will. The devil will be in the details, and we'll find out soon enough. Look, for example, we have talked about raising the minimum wage in this country to a living wage of $15 an hour for years now, and I intend to do everything I can to make that happen. I would love to have 10 Republicans supporting that legislation. If not, we're going to put it into a reconciliation bill. So bottom line is, we got crises. We have got to respond and respond aggressively. We should reach out to our Republican colleagues, hear what they have to say. But we're not going to spend, if I have anything to say about it, months and months and years and not address the incredible pain that working families in the middle class, small businesses, are now experiencing.
Well, it takes two to tango. Are you in the mood for compromise? Do you feel like you are willing to come their direction and meet somewhere in the middle?
Look, it's not a question of the middle. It's a question of responding to the crises. I don't know what the middle is when you deal with climate change, and scientists tell us we have a few years to address that crisis, or else there'll be irreparable harm. I don't know what being in the middle means when half of our population is working paycheck to paycheck, when 40 million people are facing eviction, when we have massive levels of income and wealth inequality. So, of course, I want to work with Republicans. But most importantly, we have got to address the crises facing working families, middle-income families, small businesses in this country.
Senator Sanders, it's good to have you with us today, sir. Thank you very much.
We'll be back with more of NBC's Inauguration Day coverage in just a moment. As we mentioned, we are awaiting today's parade. It'll be an inaugural parade unlike any other. This one will be mostly virtual.
And we'll see you in just a few moments. We're back with our coverage after this.
Are you ready?
Monday boost?
Are you ready for a boost?
How'd you feel about that book?
We love those nurses. That was beautiful.
We are a country of laws, a democracy built on free and fair elections, where the majority, not the mob, rules, and no rioter, no act of insurrection or domestic terror, no desperate despot can take away all we have built, all that we stand for, and all we hold dear.
Make no mistake, what happened that day was an insurrection against the United States government. Is this the beginning of something or the end of something? Should Donald Trump be ostracized from the Republican Party as you know it?
If it's Sunday, it's Meet the Press. For breaking news in our changing world, download the NBC News app.
President Biden spoke of unity and called for the country to come together in today's inaugural address. Here now just a few moments from today's speech.
This is America's day. This is democracy's day. A day of history and hope, of renewal and resolve. Through a crucible for the ages, America has been tested anew, and America has risen to the challenge. Today, we celebrate the triumph not of a candidate, but of a cause, the cause of democracy. The people, the will of the people has been heard, and the will of the people has been heeded. We've learned again that democracy is precious, democracy is fragile, and at this hour, my friends, democracy has prevailed. To overcome these challenges, to restore the soul and secure the future of America requires so much more than words. It requires the most elusive of all things in a democracy: unity. Unity. In another January, on New Year's Day in 1863, Abraham Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation. When he put pen to paper, the president said, and I quote, "If my name ever goes down into history, it'll be for this act, and my whole soul is in it." My whole soul is in it. Today, on this January day, my whole soul is in this, bringing America together, uniting our people, uniting our nation. And I ask every American to join me in this cause. We can see each other not as adversaries, but as neighbors. We can treat each other with dignity and respect. We can join forces, stop the shouting, and lower the temperature. For without unity, there is no peace, only bitterness and fury, no progress, only exhausting outrage. No nation, only a state of chaos. This is our historic moment of crisis and challenge, and unity is the path forward. And we must meet this moment as the United States of America. If we do that, I guarantee you we will not fail. We have never, ever, ever, ever failed in America. We've acted together.
President Biden, some of the key moments from his inaugural speech today. Democrat Amy Klobuchar is the senior senator from Minnesota and was a candidate for president in last year's primaries and, of course, played a big role in planning today's inauguration ceremony. Senator, good to have you with us. First of all, you're breathing a bit of a sigh of relief given the level of concern about security for this event.
I really am. You know, it was so chilling because where we were, there was actually spray paint still at the bottom of the columns. That was where the angry mob, the insurrectionists, went because they wanted to ruin the inauguration in addition to the Capitol. And so to have this go off, there were so many people who questioned going forward with the inauguration in this way. We knew it was COVID safe, but we also knew it had to be security safe. And I don't think the president should get sworn in a bunker. You know, I think we needed the leadership and President Bush there and Vice President Pence there and so many leaders from both parties. I think it makes a big difference for America. Yes, this is Joe and Kamala's day, but it is also about moving forward as a nation. And I think his message that democracy prevailed. And what I tried to do at the beginning was to set the tone that this was the moment where our democracy picks itself up, dusts itself off, and as we always do as America, moves forward as a team.
Senator, do you perceive a change? I mean, does it feel like an inflection point after what happened on January 6th, where, you know, temperatures have been lowered a bit and perhaps there's an opportunity here, if not for kumbaya and everyone agreeing? That wouldn't be democracy after all, but for, you know, a more civil discourse. And as the president said today, an ending of this uncivil war, as he put it.
Exactly. Now, we all know there's still going to be anger and there's still going to be words and there's still going to be angry thoughts on Twitter and everything else and people out trying to do harm. We know that. But if you can get a group of people, the majority of Americans, to say, wait a minute, we've got to get the vaccine out. We've got to get the vaccine distributed and expanded and more vaccines. We've got to get the economy going again. And we have other challenges from immigration to infrastructure. And so I actually think that Biden did an incredible job. The president did an incredible job. Even on that stage, in between things, he would reach out to Mitch McConnell. He would talk to Vice President Pence. And I think that's what you're going to see, a new era when it comes to working across the aisle.
Yeah, I was curious if you could elaborate what the mood was up there on the platform, the snippets of conversation, the, you know, who was talking to who.
Well, I got to talk to Lady Gaga. I'm sure you want to know.
Okay, you win.
But I think that there was, I'm really not being a Pollyanna about this, there was this mood of respect, and I think you saw it in how people interacted. There was this moment of relief. That's why at the end, when I introduced the president for the first time, I said this moment we have all been waiting for. For some, that meant the end of the ceremony, but for many of us, it meant that we needed to, in Joe Biden's word, end the grim era of demonization. And again, I know it's not going to be easy, but I promise you up on that stage, there was nothing but respect.
What did it mean to you that Vice President Pence decided to come? You know, obviously, former President Trump chose not to be there, something that we have not seen in more than 150 years. But Vice President Pence decided to come and represent the past administration. What do you think that meant to the proceedings, and what did that give to the American people?
I thought it was incredibly important, and I got to talk to him for quite a while about what had happened the night of the Electoral College vote, when in the end it was Senator Blunt and I in our positions and Vice President Pence that were walking into that room after the Capitol had been under siege, walking to the House of Representatives with the remaining ballots to get that done. And we went back over that night and what had happened, and then he talked about knowing that it was important to be there today. And I think you saw a cordial exchange between him and Vice President Harris and their spouses up on the stage, and the respect. So, I don't agree with him on a lot of things, that is clear, but I think he did his job today, and he left the Capitol with respect for the incoming administration, and that's what we needed. We didn't get it from former President Trump, but we got it from a whole bunch of other people that were up there.
So we have this moment in which folks seem to be, generally feeling good about the future, and then you're about to have an impeachment trial in the U.S. Senate. Does that roll back any goodwill that was earned today? What does that look like?
For me, given what you've heard from Liz Cheney, the number 3 Republican in the House, about how this president betrayed his oath, it's our constitutional duty to consider the impeachment articles that came over from the House. And what this would mean, if concluded, would simply mean that a president that incited a riot and attack on the co-equal branch of government couldn't serve in office again. So let's look at it as the simplest. But I think one of the things the American people have to understand is we can do 3 things at once. The American people are juggling their toddlers on their knees and their laptops on their desks, teaching their first graders how to use the mute button so that they can go to school. And we should be able to do, say, nomination hearings for the president's new cabinet in the mornings and the impeachment hearing in the afternoon, and get pandemic relief passed at night. We should do at the very least what the American people are doing, and that is juggling a whole bunch of stuff at a really hard time in their lives.
Well, Senator Klobuchar, thank you for your time today. I would like to say my first grader can do Zoom better than I can, so I can verify what you said there. Thank you so much, Senator. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Savannah. Thanks, Lester.
Okay.
We want to turn to Kelly O'Donnell. She has moved from her earlier position where she saw Air Force One take off for Florida. Now she's along the parade route. So, Kelly, we await this new parade. It's not going to be like the ones that you've covered in many years past.
It will have a very different feeling, and in some ways, I guess that makes this a unique day for President Biden and Vice President Harris. We're on 15th here, and over my shoulder, that's the Treasury building, and we expect that the motorcade will come right down the street behind us. If you can see the blue line in the street, that is the path of the motorcade, and we are at what is affectionately known in the planning as the turn. And the turn is where I am hopeful that the president may want to stop and walk the rest of the way. We're hopeful of something like that, an opportunity to perhaps see him as he is going through a neighborhood quite familiar to him, but in his long public life, he has never traveled to the White House as the president, as the man who will sleep in the White House tonight. For all of his access, for all of his up-close experiences, it is different, and the parade is all about him and the country and the turning of this page. All along this route, you have members of the law enforcement and the U.S. military who are standing as sentries along this route, about 5-6 feet apart, holding their positions, which will be a display as well as additional security in a city that you've talked about so much, has a feeling of being under lockdown, certainly in these federal areas of the district where the business of Washington takes place, very different in the neighborhoods where the people of this community live. But here in the heart of what is the government, it's got a very different feel than other times. So there will be some parade with a reduced number of participants, including the Delaware band, as well as representation from Howard University, the vice president's alma mater. So there'll be some touches that will give people a sense of that human connection. And then it's the walk to the new residence for the Bidens. That will be a family home as much as a place of government business. And for the Wilmington base that has been the home for the transition, now it's the opportunity to live above the store, where President Biden will be able to go from the Oval Office to the residence and to make a place that is familiar to him a family home, as well as a place where he is going to begin getting down to business. As you've talked about, the new administration has a plan to lay out some executive actions over a period of days. Well, they'll be talking about some of those key steps, some rolling back some of the Trump era policies, others about things that are part of the Biden agenda. So for us, this is one of those chances to see part of the celebratory nature of this day, where there is a chance to sort of get some of the pomp and circumstance and ceremony that is not a part of a COVID-related event, but they're going to make the best of it here. So we've got our position set on the blue line and on the turn, and we're going to hope for the best when the motorcade arrives.
Well,
Savannah, Lester?
if there's going to be an interview or something close to it along that parade route, my money's on Al Roker.
I was going to say, Kelly O, you're in position, but so is one Al Roker, and he's got a history here, Al. We all recall that epic moment in 2013 where you summoned Vice President Biden over for a handshake. You're there in position. Oh, we're watching it. Maybe it happens again, but this time you'll have to bump elbows.
That's right. We have to stay socially distanced, guys. It was a great moment. This has been an interesting day in that weather-wise, we've had a little bit of everything. We've had sun, we've had rain, we've had some snow. Now we've got wind gusts of up to 48 miles per hour. Current temperature is 45, but the wind chill, it feels like 36. And when you think about it, the first inaugural procession was back in 1801 for Thomas Jefferson. Now here we are 220 years later, and this procession, as Kelly mentioned, is going to be different. It is very odd. I got to tell you, I've covered a number of these, and usually I'm at this perch, and you look across, and normally you can't see the White House because of all the stands for the people. Those are gone today, obviously, because of COVID, and in their place, lining members of law enforcement and our service communities. But right now, what we're waiting for, obviously, the President and First Lady, Dr. Jill Biden, and, of course, our Vice President and the First Gentleman, or the Second Gentleman. So, you know, it's exciting. Don't put in a lot of pressure on me. It may be because of COVID or whatever, the President doesn't come over, or the Vice President. But the good news is, we've got their favorite treats that they like. Cookies for the First Lady. We've got some Snickers for the President. I believe the Second Gentleman likes jerky. And we have Reese's Peanut Butter Cups for the Vice President. So we're set. We've got bribes. We've got all sorts of things to try to entice somebody to come over. It's not for lack of trying, guys.
Al, if anyone can do it, it's you. We will try. We have full faith, but no pressure at all. But Al, it's fun to have you in your traditional spot. Even pandemic can't keep Al Roker away from an inauguration.
All right, we'll check with you along the way. Nina McBride served in the Reagan administrations, both Bush administrations, and was chief of staff to First Lady Laura Bush. Good day to you. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you so much. It was just so funny to see Al Roker and his bag of treats and tricks.
Yeah. Well, do you think it'll work?
Well, I'll tell you, if they don't take it on the parade route, have him bring it over to the White House, because certainly the resident staff there wants to have all of the special treats and things that the new first family likes.
Yeah.
So they'll eat it there, perhaps.
Because I know they've been working hard over there today, trying to transition the White House for this new first couple. Let me ask you about the First Lady, Dr. Biden. We know, she was very active as Second Lady, especially in areas of families of service members. What do you think? How will she define her new role?
Well, I think a couple of ways. Already she has said that she's going to continue working as a professor. So she's going to do that full-time job as well as the full-time job of First Lady, and it's a demanding role. But the other thing is she's already made a large number of appointments to her staff that were announced. For example, her chief of staff. Her chief of staff served as a former ambassador of the United States to Uruguay. So this is a high-powered team. She is reinstating, Dr. Biden is reinstating the Joining Forces Office, which an initiative she worked on with Mrs. Obama. So she's ready to hit the ground running, clearly, with a team in place and initiatives that she's already identified, including working on education, which will cross-cut, I'm sure, almost everything that she does.
Anita, I can't help it. I'm very fascinated with the notion of the White House staff having to literally turn over an entire house in a matter of hours, and the clock's ticking because they're literally on their way right now. Can you bring us in, give us any details on what that whole process is like? You've lived through it.
Sure, I've lived through it a couple of times, and it's, something we affectionately call at the White House organized chaos. I mean, the 100 or so members of the team, of the resident staff under the direction of the chief usher, all have a list of responsibilities that they are responsible for in terms of cleaning the house, which in the COVID world, it's probably, an extra layer of precaution. But then being prepared to receive all the items of the Bidens, to put in their closets, put their toothbrushes in toothbrush holders, hang all their clothes, really remove and replace mattresses, make the beds, make up the guest rooms for anybody who's going to be staying overnight. You have to imagine the first family is going to have some of their large family, if not all of it, staying there. The chefs will want to prepare their favorite foods and have those things ready for them for the first time that they come in the house. So it's an exciting time. It's demanding. It's also emotional because the day starts out emotional with saying goodbye to a departing first family, because regardless of circumstances, they do all become close. And the resident staff, their responsibilities to take care of that family, no matter who they are and under what circumstances.
Does it ever get, I don't want to say homesick, but are you aware of presidents and their families simply not feeling comfortable there? It's not home. It's a home like none other. And is it a difficult transition sometimes?
That is such a great question. And I think there's certainly not one president that I've had the privilege to meet in my lifetime, or first ladies, who didn't automatically feel that this was a special place and it felt like home. And a lot of it is because of what I had just mentioned to you, that even though you're living in a historic place, your things are there when you walk in the door in the private residence. So it does feel comfortable. It's a big house, but really the apartment that they all live in is not all that big. It's just quite beautiful.
Well, Anita, you obviously bring a perspective that we certainly don't have. It's interesting to hear you talk about that. Thanks for your time today. We worked with Jenna Bush, who, of course, President Bush's daughter, and she talked about when the transition happened between the Bush administration and the Obama administration in 2009, that Jenna and her sister Barbara showed Sasha and Malia, who were little girls at that time, how to slide down the banisters. So they showed them a couple of the tricks of the trade around the White House. So I guess you do somehow make it feel like home, even though it's this big grand house.
What an unbelievable opportunity. I want to bring in Chuck Todd and Andrea Mitchell as we await the arrival of the presidential motorcade to make that turn before we go into this virtual parade. Andrea, what's your understanding of what this parade looks like and how it's so different?
Well, one difference is going to be, of course, that you don't have contributions, live contributions from all over the country, but there will be virtual contributions. But there will be two drumming groups, the Howard University drum group for, of course, the alma mater of the marching band and drum corps, from Howard University for Kamala Harris, the vice president, and also from the University of Delaware for Joe Biden. So that will be two big components of it. I also wanted to comment on Jill Biden, Lester, because I was talking to her team. She is already appointed, and that person is already starting, the Joint Forces Military Families Organization that she co-founded with Michelle Obama when they were First Lady and Second Lady, and that's going to be a big part of her efforts. It's a private sector as well as nonprofits and military families to help military families with their adjustments, with their education, with housing, with health care. She's also has long been committed to cancer, long before Beau. I knew her through breast cancer work that she had started when Joe Biden was a senator, and she had friends in Delaware who had been suffering from breast cancer. So she has very much been active. The Naval Observatory, when he was vice president, they did annual events. Hoda's well aware of this. I met Hoda's mom at one of those events with Hoda. So there's a lot of outreach that they've done to the medical community and education, and she's actually literally going to be the first working first lady that we know of. They've all had many projects, as you know, Hillary Clinton famously with health care, but she's going to continue teaching very privately in community college at Nova in Northern Virginia, which she had done, of course, when he was in the Senate in Delaware and then started doing when he became vice president. For 8 years, she taught. She keeps that teaching very private. She loves it. You saw it at the Democratic National Convention. She did her speech, which they had taped, in a classroom. But that is one of the things that she is very devoted to. For the privacy of the students in the classroom, she's not bringing people into that, but that's going to be a big part of her focus.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say a big tribute to Anita McBride. What she and Laura Bush did, I was on several trips where they empowered the women of Afghanistan who are now so vulnerable, and this has been a passion for Laura Bush, with Karen Hughes and others from the Bush White House, to find equal treatment and co-education. They started the first co-education university, the American University in Kabul. That is very much in doubt right now because the Trump White House did not make it a priority of the current negotiations, the peace talks with the Taliban.
All right, Andrea, as we watch the motorcade now passing back over the Potomac, leaving Arlington, as you were talking about the First Lady, I recall I had done some stories with her about her service to military families, and I remember asking her near the end of the Obama administration, I said, it's going to be over soon. What do you miss most? And she said, running alone, not running with Secret Service. Be able to go out for a jog by herself. Looking at this motorcade, I don't think she'll be taking any solitary runs.
I hope she enjoyed those solitary runs over the last 4 years because she's back in the bubble again. You just look at that. I mean, that is how a president rolls these days with that security, the beast, the motorcade. And this procession is headed across the river from Virginia over to Washington, D.C., where normally in a typical year we would have more of a parade. You'd have throngs of people on the streets. Instead, we have throngs of armed National Guard troops to keep it safe. And also because of the pandemic, it was just never going to be feasible to have the kind of parade and procession that we've seen before. But
here's the sad thing. The journey that we've seen so far, he's not been able to come face to face with people on the streets.
Not yet.
He's been through.
But Al Roker is waiting for him,
Al Roker's
Lester.
waiting, but it's been a very, sterile ride in many ways. But as you point out, our team of intrepid correspondents waiting for when the motorcade does pass.
And passing the Lincoln Memorial, which we were talking about earlier, was the site of that solemn event last night. And Abraham Lincoln, of course, invoked, as he always is, it seems, by whether Republican or Democrat, Abraham Lincoln's words are always invoked at these events. And the president did so again today when he said that it was in his soul to do the work of unifying and unity. And Chuck, I know you're with us. We've heard mostly from Democrats today. Senator Klobuchar came on with us, right. Senator Booker, we had Senator Sanders. We haven't heard as much from Republicans. I know you have your ear to the ground as always. I mean, is this good feeling, one of those things where it's a one-day only affair, or do you feel like there might actually be some change or at least opportunity for change in Washington?
I think there's opportunity. I think that's the right way to put it. Look, we have a lot of scar tissue, and the information infrastructure in this country is broken, right? We know this. There is a good 40% of the country that basically dines out on alternative realities, and I thought David French earlier really put it well, and it really is a virus inside the Republican Party, inside the conservative media echo chamber. And what I've noticed is what you see is this. Look, there's not a lot of criticism, even from those that were the objectors, right? And some people want to call the seditionists. They've all put out statements saying, I hope he stays being, calling for unity. And of course, for some, seeing anybody that voted against counting the Electoral College, I think some people think, hey, you've got a lot of nerve being the one saying Joe Biden should be the one practicing the politics of unifying the country. But I think that, to me, says something. They know that even the most partisan anti-Biden person knew not to put out something negative today. And I think that tells you, how effective I think his speech was. And look, I do have optimism that there are 15 to 20 Senate Republicans. I don't know if the House Republicans are there. That's the Trump wing of the party. But the Senate Republicans have always been the most allergic to the Trump wing. I think there are 15 to 20 that, at least in the first 6 months, because of what happened on January 6th, who will believe that they almost have a duty to perhaps work with Biden more so than maybe they would have without the events of January 6th. But that's where I have some hope, because you know what? Joe Biden's never going to quit. You know, Barack Obama maybe didn't love talking to Congress and negotiating. Joe Biden is going to be like LBJ. You know, I mean, there's a great story where LBJ said, come on over to have a drink with me here at the White House with a Senate leader. And he said, oh, not tonight. And then President LBJ would go to the Congress and go meet with him. Joe Biden's never going to quit trying to get Republicans, and I think that will pay dividends.
As Savannah made point, it takes two to tango. What are Democrats willing to give? Where are there opportunities to help bridge some of this gap, come back the other way?
Look, I think focusing on COVID and opening the economy is a very, I think, easy bipartisan deal to make. Okay, look, the President Biden's COVID plan, you know, probably the quote hardest two things to get 60 votes on 10 additional Republicans will be on raising the minimum wage and perhaps aid to state and local government. But I actually think that those are achievable. I think where you start to see it get difficult to sort of get bipartisan consensus is going to be when he starts to try to tackle things like immigration. That's still going to be enormously divisive in this town, sadly, because it is easy to demonize that issue.
Well, let's continue to watch, and I think we got Kelly O'Donnell, she's in position here. There she is, and the motorcade it's coming your way, Kelly, and I think it is at about your point that you're at 15th Street and New York Avenues in Washington, D.C. I think that's the point where it's expected the president will get out and stroll for a bit.
That's what we're hoping. It's been described as the turn. And as you can see, we now have a parade. So even though the city does not have the spectators, there are still lots of people, law enforcement, military, people who are vendors, who have the secure credential to get into this perimeter today, who are part of this. It is a slow-rolling parade, to be sure, but this will give people a sense of the pageantry of this day on this part of Pennsylvania Avenue, when so much of the focus earlier in the day was about, of course, the swearing in, the Capitol, the West Front. Here we go. This is now officially the turn as police from the Metro Department here, those are our local police officers, are a part of this with the color of sirens. We see the flags blowing in the wind. It has been a chilly, windy day here. And this slow turn is part of the welcome home ride for President Biden and First Lady Jill Biden. And now you can see a color guard. And this is part of what I'm hearing in the distance too, the music of a parade, the color, the pageantry, the cadence of it. And this is now coming to Pennsylvania Avenue, a place that has been closed to vehicle traffic and much of the pedestrian traffic as well in the years since 9/11. And it's on days like this that it is opened up in a limited way, and it becomes a part of our national story with the color of the honor guard coming here. And then behind that, we're hoping for some luck that the president will want to make that turn. They've done some rehearsal for all of this, as you can imagine. And it's just something to take in. Before it's virtual, we're getting a taste of live action.